Hey guys, tonight we're going full Viking. Picture this, it's the middle of a Scandinavian winter. 9th century, no gas, no electricity, no heated blankets or electric kettles. Just you, the dark, the cold, and a longhouse full of steaming bodies and questionable smells. Sounds cozy, right? Don't worry, you'll probably be fine. Probably. But let's be honest, if you were actually dropped into this world right now in your sleep soft skin and smartphone dependency, you probably wouldn't survive the week. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Seriously, it helps. And hey, tell me where you're tuning in from and what time it is right now. Are we surviving this night together, or are you just peeking in during daylight? Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. It begins in the silence before the storm, early winter, just as the first true cold snaps the air like a bear trap. You're standing on the edge of a Viking village tucked between fjord and forest, the snow already deep enough to reach your shins. It's a kind of cold that doesn't politely ask you to put on a sweater. It claws straight into your bones, the kind that makes your eyelashes freeze if you blink too slow. But tonight you won't be out here long. You're expected inside the longhouse. Your breath curls like smoke as you push open the thick wooden door, stepping out of one kind of wilderness into another. Immediately, your senses are ambushed. The heat inside is surprising, but so is the stench. Smoke from a central hearth coils up into the rafters, only half escaping through a smoke hole above. There's no chimney, no vent, just the hope that the fire breathes better than you. Your eyes sting and water as you blink around the room. It's dim, thick with the musk of wet wool, goat hair, unwashed humans, dried fish, and something you can only describe as barnyard adjacent. The floor is packed earth, padded with straw that's already matted from days, maybe weeks, of foot traffic and spilled stew. Welcome home. You're not alone, of course. Viking life wasn't big on personal space. The longhouse is one big room where families, animals, and even a few guests huddle together for warmth. Wooden partitions offer minimal privacy, but they don't stop the sound. Every whisper, cough, and grumble echoes in the thick night air. And oh yeah, there's a sheep asleep in the corner near your bedding. She's wearing a bell, you don't know why. The people here move slowly, layered in wool and fur, their faces red from smoke and cold. Most have already claimed a place near the central hearth, a wide stone-lined fire pit that serves as both kitchen and heater. The fire's low now, embers glowing orange, but someone is stacking peat bricks beside it, prepping for the long night ahead. Wood is too precious to burn freely. In the winter, dried peatsid and even dung keep the fire alive. You settle near the edge, taking off your boots, still wet and rimmed with ice, and tuck your feet under a rough wool blanket. A woman hands you a cup of something warm. It tastes like sour milk with a hint of ash, probably fermented. Everything here is either fermented or smoked, because that's the only way anything survives past autumn. It burns a little going down, but it's heat, and right now heat is everything. Outside, the wind howls. The walls, made from thick planks of timber sealed with clay and moss, groan under the pressure of the cold. You wonder how much colder it has to get before the walls themselves crack. It's not unheard of. There are stories, always stories, of whole families freezing inside their homes during blizzards that lasted too long. The trick, they say, is to keep the fire alive and keep breathing slow. If you can do those two things, you might make it until sunrise. As night deepens, so does the dark. There's no moon tonight, and no starlight penetrates the thick thatch roof. Time begins to lose meaning. There are no clocks, no screens. You gauge the hours by how many logs, or dung bricks, have burned, and by how long it's been since you last heard someone move. That silence? That's when the cold is most dangerous. That's when it creeps in. But Vikings are nothing if not prepared. This isn't their first winter after all. The furs are stacked high, the dried meat salted stiff into baggers hung from beams. The children are wrapped like burritos under shared quilts, their breath rising in little puffs. The dogs are curled into fur balls near the fire, radiating warmth and occasional fleas. Even the chickens in the corner seem resigned to the fact that they are now indoor animals. Survival isn't elegant, it's layered, cramped, loud and pungent, but it works. Now here's a historical kicker. Some Viking settlements built their longhouses so partially underground that only the roofs were visible under snowdrifts. The earth itself became insulation. Fringe theory? A few archaeologists think that in extreme cases, people may have temporarily sealed themselves in during deep winter, only opening up when weather permitted, like a family of human bears hibernating in barely breathable warmth. Others argue that's overstated. Vikings were tough, but not mole people. The debate continues. A few hours into the night, someone adds a bit of dried seaweed to the fire, a trick to make it burn hotter and longer. The smell is terrible, but the heat rises noticeably. Your cheeks tingle as feeling returns to your frozen nose. Somewhere in the house, someone snores. You close your eyes, trying to ignore the dull ache in your toes. You wrap your wool tunic tighter, pull the blanket to your chin, and breathe. Slow, steady, shallow. You're one fire away from a frozen death. But for now, the embers glow. For now, you're warm enough. You're half awake when the rooster inside the house starts crowing. Yes, inside, you crack one eye open, and there he is, perched on a low rafter, looking smug and entirely too pleased with himself. It's still pitch black outside. He doesn't care. He's a Viking rooster. Time means nothing to him. You groan, pulling the fur tighter around your shoulders, but it's too late. The fire has died down to a few tired embers, and the warmth has faded with it. The air inside the longhouse has that particular dead chill that seeps into your ribs. It's morning, technically, or what passes for it in the darkest weeks of the year. Someone stirs near the hearth. It's time to feed the fire, and fast. You watch the process like it's a sacred ritual, and in a way it is. Keeping the fire going isn't just a chore, it's survival. The central hearth is the beating heart of the longhouse. Without it, there's no cooking, no warmth, no light. It's about 4 feet long, lined with flat stones that crack and blacken from the heat over time. There's no chimney, just a hole in the roof above, and it doesn't exactly vent as much as it reminds you you're slowly inhaling a lifetime of smoke. The woman tending the fire adds a few more peat bricks, dried and pressed like ancient brownies. She blows gently, coaxing the glow until flame licks up again. Your eyes adjust to the murky half-light. Smoke clings in lazy layers near the rafters, which are heavy with bundles of herbs, dried fish, and a few fur-wrapped lumps you really hope are food. The longhouse is rectangular, maybe 60 feet long, and you realise how smart this design is. Narrow enough that everyone stays close to the centre, where the fire's heat reaches. Thick log walls, moss-packed gaps, slanted thatch roof. It's a brilliant combo of brute force and insulation. You touch the timber beside your sleeping area. It's cold, sure, but dry. That's something. Now the activity picks up. A few people move around, grabbing clay pots and dipping ladles into water barrels that haven't frozen because they were placed near the hearth. The smell of something boiling, probably barley, maybe cabbage, starts to cut through the layers of smoke and sheep. Breakfast in the Viking Age isn't elegant. It's warm, mushy and vaguely sour, but it fills your stomach and warms your hands as you cradle the bowl. It might also be thick with the last night's leftovers, and the night before that. Food rotation isn't really a concept here. It's all stew, forever. As you eat, you take in more details of your temporary home. The floor is packed dirt, uneven in places, and covered in straw that's supposed to keep things dry and slightly warmer. It does neither very well, but it's better than bare ground. Around the edges of the room, wooden sleeping platforms are raised just off the floor. They're narrow, more like benches than beds, and covered with hides, furs, and rough spun wool blankets. You can feel the damp in everything. Even the warmth feels wet. In one corner, there's a partitioned space, slightly more private, probably for the head of the household. Nearby, a pile of firewood sits in the driest spot they could find. It's not much. Winter's only just begun, and already the supply looks tight. Wood was hard to come by, especially in places like Iceland, where forests were scarce. That's why peat, dung, and even driftwood became precious. There's no running to the woodshed here. Fire management is part of the day's battle plan. Near the entryway, something grunts. A pig. You'd forgotten about the livestock. There's a whole section of the longhouse carved off just for them. Not because of affection, but because they generate heat. Cows, goats, chickens, and yes, the rooster. They all live here through the winter. A living furnace of snorting, clucking body warmth. It's loud, it's smelly, and it's genius. The warmth they produce helps regulate the indoor temperature, especially at night. The downside? They don't respect your sleep schedule. You shuffle closer to the hearth, stretching out your hands. The smoke curls up and around you, sinking into your clothes and hair. It'll never come out. You're becoming one with the longhouse now. You wonder how people survive breathing this in every night for decades. That's the thing, they didn't always. Lung damage, eye irritation, and chronic coughing were the price of not freezing to death. In fact, historians still debate whether longhouse dwellers had some kind of trick, vents, open slats, or rotating hearth positions to manage the smoke. No one's quite sure. You're guessing it was more a matter of tolerance than technology. One of the elders beckons you to help with the insulation checks. Yes, that's a real thing. Even in a place without electricity, you still get drafted for winter maintenance. You follow him along the interior wall, pushing clumps of moss and straw back into place where cold air leaks in. It's oddly satisfying, plugging up gaps in the wall like you're sealing a ship from sinking. Every breeze you stop is a few more degrees of heat that won't escape into the icy nothing outside. As you work, you find yourself getting used to the sensory overload. The smoke, the animal stink, the bitter tang of peat in the air. It becomes background noise, like living inside an ancient coughing beast that snores through the long night. There's a rhythm to the day. Tend the fire, eat warm mush, patch walls, mind the animals, rest near heat. There's no outside unless you absolutely must, and even then you better be quick. The latrine, don't ask, not yet. That's a horror show for another time. One particularly odd detail catches your attention. Several of the wooden beams have been carved with strange symbols. Runes, simple but deliberate. When you ask about them, you are told they're protection spells, markings to ward off frost spirits, sickness, and then whatever else lurks in the dark during the long winter months. A mix of superstition and spiritual insulation. Do they work? Who knows, but no one's risking a night without them. By now the fire is roaring again. The longhouse is warm in a suffocating, steamy kind of way. Everyone's breathing a little easier. You sit back down, wrap the fur around your shoulders, and feel your feet again for the first time since yesterday. The rooster flaps to a different beam, squawking just once. Even he seems tired. You survived your first full Viking night indoors. Barely. The sun, what little there is, won't rise for hours, but you've got fire, food, and enough layers to mummify a walrus. You're starting to see how they did it, not by fighting the cold, but by outsmarting it inch by itchy, smoky inch. There's no way around it. Your wool tunic itches like you're wearing a sweater made of pine needles. You scratch under the collar for the 10th time and realise that, in Viking terms, you're dressed pretty decently now. Not stylish, not even clean, but insulated. You're swaddled in layers. Thick wool underclothes, a scratchy tunic over that, a belt cinched so tight it's giving you a new waistline, plus trousers, leg wraps, socks made from woven wool, and fur-lined boots that feel like someone taxidermied a wet dog and wrapped it around your feet. And still the cold finds a way in. Always. You had hoped for something grander. Furs, maybe a dramatic bear pelt over your shoulders, but real Viking winterwear isn't made for drama. It's made for survival. Fur is expensive and often saved for outer layers or cloaks. Wool is the real MVP, specifically Vadmal. A coarse, homespun wool cloth used for just about everything, including trade. You're wearing the currency of the north, and if you are actually living here, your outfit might even be worth a few sheep. But here's where things get clever. This wool isn't just thick, it's oily. Lanolin, naturally occurring in sheep's wool, repels water and keeps the fibres flexible. When it's woven tight enough, that scratchy tunic becomes a personal sauna that somehow breathes and sweats with you. You learn the trick quickly. Don't strip off your base layer even if it gets damp. Your body heat creates a warm microclimate inside the clothing. It's kind of like living in a damp oven. A very smelly, portable oven. Welcome to Viking fashion. You take a seat near the fire as someone adjusts their cloak. A rectangle of heavy wool pinned at one shoulder with a brooch. It's multifunctional, a blanket, a shawl, a windbreak. Sometimes even a baby wrap or an emergency shield. And it's easier to throw off if you need to run to the outhouse. Which, let's be honest, still sounds like a nightmare you're not ready for. The older woman next to you is spinning wool by hand. Her fingers move fast despite the cold twisting fibres into a rough, even thread. She doesn't talk, she just works, the rhythm hypnotic, the wool piling up slowly beside her like soft grey smoke. This thread will eventually be woven into more cloth on the upright loom, sitting along the wall. An absolute monster of wooden beams and hanging weights. You eye it with the quiet respect one reserves for siege engines or early torture devices. Here's your historical nugget for the day. Viking textiles weren't just homespun, they were handcrafted in every literal sense. Women controlled the wool economy, spinning, dyeing, weaving, tailoring, it was all done in-house. A single tunic could take weeks to make from scratch. And we're not talking fine embroidery here, just the base garment. Want colour? Prepare to boil lichens or ferment urine to fix the dye. Yes, urine. Some colours required ammonia to bond to the wool. You're suddenly very grateful your tunic is a simple grey-brown, rustic, safe, but not everything about Viking winter wear was practical. There were flashes of vanity. People added tablet-woven trim, beadwork or dyed patches to show status or regional identity. A particularly warm hat might sport a fringe just for fun, and boots were often made from overlapping layers of fur or hide shaped with an eye for durability and swagger. Your feet are currently wrapped in rawhide and stuffed with straw. A poor man's insulation, but it does the job. Barely. As the day passes, the longhouse feels more like a nest. There's constant motion, people adjusting layers, rotating clothes by the fire, beating out frozen garments on the threshold. Laundry is rare in winter. No one's hauling frozen tunics to a stream. Instead, clothes are aired out, smoked, accidentally or on purpose, or beaten cleanish. You catch a younger boy holding his shirt over the fire to bake the fleas out. He grins as it crackles. You take a few steps back, just in case. One of the older men shows you his mittens, thick single-piece constructions made of felted wool, with a double cuff to trap warmth at the wrist. They're rough but ingenious. The felt is created by matting and compressing wool using heat, moisture and friction, essentially controlled chaos. The result is windproof and nearly waterproof as long as it stays dryish. You slip one on, it's stiff, smells like sheep and smoke, and still feels better than modern fleece. Now here comes a weird fringe fact for your mental scrapbook. There's evidence that some Vikings stuffed moss or fur inside their clothes to improve insulation. Not sewn in, just shoved in. Moss in your shirt, fur in your boots, straw under your belt, you're a walking nest of organic heat-trapping materials. It's not elegant, but it works. It's also why your waistband keeps slipping. Your belt is fighting a war against all the lumpy additions shoved underneath it. And of course, not everyone agrees on the full picture. Scholars argue over what Viking winterwear really looked like. Some point to sagas and burial finds as proof of complex layering systems, while others caution that what we know is heavily skewed by what survived. Wool and fur decompose. Metal brooches don't. We might think Vikings wore flashy pins and went bare-chested the rest of the time, but that's just what the grave goods show. The reality was probably much more modest and much more scratchy. After hours indoors, it's finally your turn to brave the outside. You wrap up like you're going on an Arctic expedition, hat pulled low, mittens on, cloak fastened tight. You duck out of the longhouse, straight into a blast of cold air so sharp it actually makes your teeth ache. The snow crunches under your boots, your eyelashes freeze again. You can't feel your face within 2 minutes, and yet you don't die. The layers work. They trap heat and push back against the frost. You walk stiffly to the edge of the animal enclosure, check on a tied-up goat, and return victorious. Cold, miserable, but alive. You've survived your first real outing in Viking winterwear. You look ridiculous, smell worse, and feel like you've aged 10 years, but you didn't freeze. Back inside, someone hands you a mug of hot broth. You sip it slowly, letting the heat undo the cold's damage. And as you settle back onto your fur-covered bench, you start to understand the rhythm of Viking winter. Layer up, stay near the fire, move as little as possible, and always, always wear your wool. You're sitting on a rough wooden bench near the fire when your stomach lets out a long, sad groan. It's been hours since that questionable barley mush you had for breakfast, and the smell of something cooking in a cauldron across the room is starting to mess with your already delicate self-control. It smells like meat. Real meat. You're not sure if it's pork, goat or rat, and honestly, at this point you don't care. But before you can get too excited, a boy walks by with a basket of dried fish and tosses one into your lap. That's lunch. You try not to look disappointed. This is survival food, not fine dining. The fish is hard and curled like a prehistoric scroll. You try to break off a piece, but it's like chewing salted wood. Apparently this is stock fish, cod that's been wind-dried for months until it becomes, basically, edible lumber. The Vikings loved it. It lasts forever, doesn't spoil in the cold, and it's like light enough to haul around on long journeys. Your teeth, on the other hand, are weeping. Eventually, you just suck on a piece until it softens. Barely. Nearby, an older man is gnawing on a hunk of smoked lamb that looks much more appealing. He must be important or lucky. Meat like that is usually saved for special occasions or higher status folks. But when winter slams the fjords shut and snowballs in your village, everyone eats what they can. Fermented dairy, preserved meats, dried legumes, turnips, onions, barley, whatever they manage to stash away during the harvest months. There's no new food coming, not for months. You stand and wander toward the food stores, curious and hungry. The pantry area is really just a low platform raised off the dirt floor, partly enclosed with rough boards. It's shadowy with the unmistakable smell of onions, dried herbs, and something sour you can't identify. Clay jars are packed with pickled vegetables. There's a bag of hard rye flatbread, so dry it could double as a shield. Baskets hold shriveled apples and wrinkled root vegetables, all carefully packed in straw, and hanging from the beams above are lengths of sausage, probably horse meat if the rumours are true, and animal stomachs filled with blood pudding. A woman catches you eyeing a lump of yellowish cheese and gives you a nod. You reach out, break off a crumb, and instantly regret it. It's sharp, salty, and tastes like it fought a goat for dominance and lost, but you chew and swallow like a true Viking because food is food, and this cheese might be the last non-frozen thing you eat this week. It's amazing, honestly, how much thought went into winter food prep. Back in autumn, the entire village would have been a frenzy of activity. Smoking meat over open fires, drying herbs on every rafter, burying root vegetables in pits packed with moss, fermenting dairy into skyr, a kind of Icelandic yogurt that tastes like sour cream met vinegar in a dark alley. And don't forget brewing. Ale and mead were safer to drink than water in winter, plus they took the edge off the cold. You've heard of morning mead. Now you understand it. And here's a quirky little food fact. Vikings sometimes preserved eggs by coating them in ashes and storing them in cool, dry corners. If done right, they could last for months. If done wrong, well, you'd know, explosively. Back by the fire, someone's ladling soup into wooden bowls. You get a generous helping, some kind of stew thickened with barley and potato-like root vegetables, flavoured with dried herbs and blessedly a piece of actual meat. You savour each bite. It's warm, it's salty, it's filling. This is more than food, it's hope. As you eat, you overhear the others trading stories. Some of failed hunts, others of near-starvation winters. One man swears they once boiled leather boots to survive a snowstorm. Another laughs and says at least boots aren't poisonous, unlike the mushrooms they accidentally stored last year. Food stories in winter are half warning, half folklore. They remind you how fine the line is between a full belly and a famine. Of course, not every Viking community had equal access to food. Coastal villages had fish, inland ones had livestock. Those with connections to trade routes might score luxury items, walnuts, honey, dried fruit, even spices. But for most people, the winter diet was repetitive and brutally simple. Fat and salt were your best friends. Variety was a myth. You didn't eat for joy, you ate for fuel. Still, meals were social. Even in the coldest months, people gathered around the hearth to eat together, share gossip, and give thanks that they weren't dead yet. They didn't have the luxury of sulking off to eat alone. Every bite was a communal act of defiance against the cold and the hunger. And that brings you to a running debate among historians. Did Viking diets really suck this much in winter, or are we underestimating their ingenuity? Some argue that food preservation techniques were more advanced than we think, that they used underground pits with natural ventilation, snow insulation layers, and even fermentation caves. Others believe most communities scraped by and kept starvation just barely at bay, especially in harsh years. The truth probably varies by region and century, but here in your smoke-choked longhouse, with your mouth full of mystery meat stew, you lean toward the grimmer version. This feels like barely surviving, not thriving. You finish your bowl using a crust of rye bread to wipe up the last of the grease. It's dense and sour and takes forever to chew, but it's satisfying in the way only winter food can be. Your stomach, no longer howling in protest, settles. Around you, people stretch out on benches, bellies full, cloaks wrapped tight. A few let out deep sighs, the sound of bodies temporarily at peace. Someone tosses another peat brick on the fire. It crackles, flares, then settles into a steady burn. The longhouse grows warmer again. You pull your wool close, lean back against a beam and rest your head. You made it through another meal, another day. It's still dark outside, it'll stay that way for a while. But inside there's food, fire, company. In the Viking winter that's more than enough. You're back near the hearth, watching the flames flicker and spit. when someone shuffles by with a bundle of dried brown bricks in their arms. At first glance you think it's wood. Finally, some real firewood, but no, that friend is peat, the Vikings' favourite winter miracle, dried, compressed bog muck. Earth, moss and organic matter aged in the cold embrace of a swamp for thousands of years, cut into blocks and are left to dry all summer long. Now, in the darkest, coldest season, it's the fuel that keeps you from becoming a historical footnote. They toss a few blocks onto the coals, the fire wheezes, crackles, and then revives with a low, steady flame. The smell hits your nose instantly. Rich, earthy, a little smoky, with a hint of dead things that decomposed 1,000 years ago. It's not pleasant, it's not awful, it's just part of the air now. You were expecting logs, axes, giant wood piles. Isn't that what Vikings are all about? Chopping down forests with reckless abandon? Turns out not exactly. Sure, some places had trees. Norway, for instance, had decent forests. But if you're in Iceland or Greenland, good luck. Trees are sparse and cutting one down is like chopping up your roof to stay warm. Not smart. The Vikings adapted. They found other sources. Peat, dried dung, driftwood. Fire became a matter of ingenuity, not brute force. Someone near the door walks in, stomping snow from their boots, and drops a sack of something that smells worse than the peat. You get a closer look and realise, yep, dung, cow dung, goat dung. Maybe even horse, dried out and formed into flat patties. You try not to stare as a few get tossed on the fire. The smell is sharp, acrid, like burning hair and regret. But the heat? Instant, powerful, cosy if you ignore the olfactory assault. And dung wasn't just for burning, oh no. It had a second career as building material. Mixed with straw, it created a paste used to seal wall gaps and patch floors. In winter, it was insulation. So while you're sitting there in your dung-heated, dung-plastered longhouse, watching dung patties roast in the fire, you begin to understand the level of Viking resourcefulness. They used everything. You start to think of dung less as waste and more as fuel with a marketing problem. Now, back to peat. It didn't grow overnight. Vikings had to cut and dry it during the warmer months, stacking it in great towers near the longhouse. The work was filthy, soggy, stinking, exhausting, but necessary. And once dried, peat was surprisingly efficient. It burned slow and hot, perfect for long nights. The downside? You had to plan ahead. Run out midwinter, and you're basically slow cooking yourself into an ice mummy. You glance around the room and spot the storage pile. It's not huge, which makes you nervous. People keep casting quick looks at it, mentally calculating how many nights it needs to last. You're on rationed heat. Every brick of peat, every dung patty, every scrap of burnable driftwood has to be stretched as far as possible. It gets worse. Sometimes Vikings even burned bones. Animal bones, if they had no other choice. They'd throw them into the fire with whatever fat or marrow was left, hoping for a quick flare of warmth. Desperate? Maybe. But in winter, desperation was a lifestyle. You start to understand why feasting in the cold months was such a big deal. Not just for calories or celebration, but because it meant burning fuel you couldn't spare. Feasting was a flex. You move closer to the hearth, feeling the welcome press of heat. The fire is now a patchwork of peat bricks, dung patties, and a few precious wood chips. It doesn't look like much, but it's doing its job. The air is warm enough that your toes have thawed, though not enough to take off your boots. That would be suicide. But your fingers, you hold them out toward the flames and flex them gratefully. Then something strange happens. One of the older men pulls out a bundle of dried seaweed and tosses it onto the fire. It flares instantly, crackling blue and green like a fireworks show in miniature. The smell is sea salt and brine, sharp and nose-pinching. You blink through the smoke and the man grins. Burns fast, he mutters, but makes a good flame. You're impressed. Seaweed, peat, dung, bones. Is there anything Vikings didn't try to burn? Well, yes, wet wood. That's the joke, really. You learn quickly that nothing is worse than damp timber. It smokes, stinks, and doesn't give heat. But sometimes that's all that's left. There are stories of people burning furniture or even parts of their house in desperation. The line between fuel and shelter, thin and flambé. Now for a scholarly twist. There's still debate about how advanced Viking fire techniques really were. Some think they had clever systems for airflow, using vents or angled roof slats to direct smoke and conserve heat. Others say they were winging it with half-choked fires and coughing families. Archaeological finds show hearths built in varying ways, some stone-lined and deep, others shallow and wide. The inconsistency suggests a culture of experimentation. Every region, even every family, had its own method of not freezing to death. You lean back and study the fire again. There's something primal about it. The constant tending, vidding, adjusting. You can't just light it and forget it. It demands your attention. Someone is always on fire duty, even at night. The glow, the crackle, the dance of shadows. It's hypnotic, comforting, alive. It becomes the centre of everything: cooking, warmth, storytelling, even ceremony. Without it, this place would be a tomb. As the night deepens, the fire burns lower. Someone adds another peat brick, then wraps a wool shawl around their shoulders and slumps against the wall. You're tired. The warmth makes your eyelids heavy. But you've also become fire-aware. You watch it the way modern people check their phone batteries, constantly, nervously, like it might vanish if you look away. And maybe that's the biggest lesson so far. Survival here isn't flashy. It's a million tiny acts. Tending a fire, rationing peat, burning seaweed, saving dung. You don't win against winter. You bargain with it, one smoky breath at a time. You curl closer to the hearth, cloak tight, smoke in your lungs and dung-fueled warmth against your cheeks. You close your eyes, listening to the fire's low hiss, and for a moment, you almost forget the world outside is frozen solid. Almost. You wake to the sound of someone groaning softly, followed by the unmistakable thud of a chamber pot being shoved across the straw-covered floor. You freeze, not out of politeness, no, that ship sailed long ago, but because every muscle in your body feels stiff, frozen, and oddly twisted, like you slept curled in a laundry basket full of bricks. You're still wrapped in your wool cloak, pressed between two equally lumpy people who've both turned their backs on you during the night. There's a dog at your feet, possibly two. It's hard to tell where your body ends and the pile of limbs, fur and fleece begins. This is Viking sleeping, and there is no such thing as personal space. You shift slowly, careful not to wake the woman snoring on your left, or step on the child half tangled in the cloak on your right. The fire is little more than a red-orange glow now, casting a sleepy, pulsing light across the beams. You can hear the wind howling outside. It hasn't stopped. It just got meaner. Sleeping through winter in a Viking longhouse isn't about luxury, it's about strategy. Heat is your most precious commodity, and body heat is surprisingly efficient when you don't have the luxury of modern insulation. The entire household piles together on the sleeping platforms lining the walls, pressed so tightly that if someone turns, at least 3 others turn with them. It's like synchronized swimming, but in itchy wool and with more grunting. The sleeping area itself is slightly raised, just enough to avoid the worst of the cold seeping up from the earth. Animal hides cover the benches, and straw is tucked underneath for padding and warmth. On top, heavy wool blankets and fur throws layered like lasagna. If you're lucky, you scored a pelt from a bear or a reindeer. If not, it's sheepskins, goat furs, and the thickest woven cloth they could make. You're not picky. Anything that doesn't smell like death and holds heat gets your approval. Now here's a historical curiosity for you. There's evidence that people slept in shifts or rotated positions to share warmth more evenly. Some families had designated sleeping spots, elders by the fire, kids toward the middle, guests at the edge. Others slept in head-to-foot arrangements, especially in large families where space was tight. You realise quickly that romantic notions of Viking life leave out the fact that you might spend the night staring at someone's frozen toes 6 inches from your nose. Charming. You inch your way upright and stretch, trying not to disturb the delicate human sandwich you're part of. Your shoulder cracks loudly. Someone groans. You freeze again. Still alive? Good. Now the real fun begins. Extracting yourself from the warmth cocoon. The fire's embers aren't doing much anymore, and the air in the room is cold enough to sting your cheeks. You throw back the fur and brace yourself. The cold slams into you instantly, stealing your breath. It's like diving into icy water, except instead of surfacing, you just stay there, shivering. Your clothes are cold too. Everything you were wearing yesterday, now slightly damp with sweat, has frozen into a subtle kind of crunch. But you know better than to take anything off. Drying clothing is a nightmare in winter. There's no laundry rotation, just airing things out near the fire and hoping they don't get worse. You shuffle toward the hearth, teeth chattering, and begin the ritual of feeding the fire. A few dry peat bricks and a dung patty later, the flames creep back to life, slowly, reluctantly, and then comes the sound you were dreading. The child next to you coughs, sharp and rattling. It cuts through the morning like a warning bell. Illness is an ever-present threat in these conditions. Everyone's breathing the same smoky air, sharing the same fleas, inhaling each other's germs in one low-ceilinged, poorly ventilated room. Respiratory infections? Common. Lice and skin issues? Absolutely. Tuberculosis? Potentially. Your nose is already running and your throat feels scratchy. You try not to think about it. To make matters worse, you hear the unmistakable sound of rats scurrying under the sleeping platform. They've been busy, drawn to warmth and leftover food scraps. You see a flash of one, fat and smug, as it darts from under a bench and vanishes into the shadows. Nobody reacts. Rats are a fact of life here. People hate them, but not enough to do anything about it before breakfast. Now, here's the quirky fringe fact for this section. Some Viking communities, particularly in colder, more remote settlements, are believed to have slept in full communal huddles with livestock. And not just passive cohabitation either. There are references in folk stories and regional lore that suggest people would intentionally bring smaller animals like goats or dogs into the bedding area to act as heat sources. One saga even mentions a man sleeping with his oxen inside a hay-stuffed stall during a snowstorm to survive. Does it make the longhouse stink? Absolutely. But does it keep you alive? Probably. It's a gamble between frostbite and farmyard funk, and everyone seems to choose the latter. You're handed a bowl of something warm, barley porridge again, but now thickened with a little leftover meat fat and maybe a scrap of turnip. It's seaming and salty and goes down like fire. You wrap your fingers around the bowl and don't let go, using it as a makeshift hand warmer between bites. Then the old woman from yesterday grunts and nods toward the back corner of the longhouse. You follow her gesture and realise what she means. The toilet bucket needs to be emptied. Ah, yes. The other reason everyone huddles in one room, so no one forgets the joys of Viking sanitation. The communal chamber pot is a wooden bucket with a lid, slightly raised on a stone platform. It reeks. You stare at it with dread. Someone has to carry it outside through the snow to the latrine trench or dumping spot well beyond the warmth of the walls. Guess what? It's your turn. You sigh, stand, and wrap yourself in your cloak again. The weight of the cold hits you like a sledgehammer. You hold your breath, grab the bucket, and step outside. The wind howls instantly. Your breath freezes in your nostrils. You trudge through thigh-deep snow, slip once, and finally reach the waste pit. You dump the contents, gag a little, and sprint back toward the longhouse like your life depends on it. It kind of does. Inside, someone makes room for you near the fire again. You don't even care that you smell like cold dung and shame. You curl back into the warmth, lungs heaving, heart pounding, grateful for the heavy weight of fur and the slow crackle of fire. Sleeping in the Viking Age isn't about dreams. It's about not dying. It's about group heat, body strategy, and doing your turn with the toilet bucket. It's ugly. It's raw. But it works. And as you finally close your eyes again, nestled back into the human dog pile of survival, you realise something strange. It's starting to feel normal. The fire is crackling again, and your breath no longer comes out in little clouds, which is the Viking version of a good morning. You're still huddled near the hearth, legs wrapped in wool, the back of your tunic smelling vaguely of peat smoke and something mammalian. Your fingers are thawed just enough to move without aching, and you think, just maybe, you've survived the worst of the night. That is, until someone hands you a rock the size of a cabbage and motions for you to put it in the fire. You stare at it, confused. It's not special looking, just a round grey stone. Definitely not a snack. But the woman shoves it toward the coals and grunts, and that's all the instruction you're going to get. So into the fire it goes. A few hours later, you finally get the point. The stone is red hot now, glubsing faintly, like it's embarrassed to be useful. Using a pair of tongs made from twisted iron, she pulls it from the coals and tucks it inside a thick cloth pouch. Then she hands it to an old man who drops it under his blanket like it's a sacred relic. He lets out a deep sigh of relief, and you finally understand this is stone heat. The original hot water bottle. You're next. A smaller stone gets the same treatment, bundled in thick wool and handed to you like a baby wrapped in fire. You shove it under your cloak and instantly your whole chest radiates warmth. It's not just cozy, it's medicine. The kind that keeps fingers from going numb and spirits from shattering. Who needs gas heat when you've got rock science? The use of heated stones is brilliant in its simplicity. Stones, especially dense ones like granite or soapstone, retain heat for hours once they've soaked it in. They can be rotated, one batch warming in the fire while the other keeps you alive in bed. Some families even had dedicated bed stones, passed down through generations. Imagine having a family heirloom that literally just sits in your bed and keeps your spleen from freezing. Beautiful. Some of the more seasoned folks know tricks, wrapping the stones in herbs to release scent as they warm, or sandwiching them between 2 fur layers to make them last longer. You watch one woman place hers at her feet, then layer her cloak over it, creating a tiny heat cave. Genius. Meanwhile, your own rock is already cooling. You sneak back toward the fire to trade it out like a kid trying to swap candy. Later, you saw someone pulls a larger flat stone from near the coals and places it on the bench beside them. It sizzles faintly. They wrap it in straw and rest their back against it, sighing contentedly. This is next-level comfort. You realise stones aren't just for bed. They're used throughout the longhouse as passive heaters. They're stacked near walls, placed under sleeping benches, tucked beside water barrels to keep them from freezing. You even spot one being used as a makeshift seat warmer. And here's the historical twist for the night. Archaeologists in northern Europe have found smoothed stones near Viking dwellings that they believe were used exactly like this, purposeful, heat-retaining stones for nighttime warmth. Some even suggest that certain rocks were chosen specifically for their heat-holding ability. That means that while some Viking warriors were out raiding, someone else was out rock-picking for thermal optimization. You can't decide if that's adorable or wildly impressive. Probably both. Now, not everyone agrees. Some scholars argue there's not enough written or archaeological evidence to claim heated stones were widespread or used intentionally as heaters. But others point out that oral tradition and practical survival leave a lot unrecorded. It's the kind of thing so normal, so everyday, that nobody bothered writing it down, like explaining how to breathe. The logic tracks. Fire is the heart of the home, but fire doesn't follow you to bed. You can't sleep in the hearth, and setting up open flames near straw and animal skins, that's a one-way ticket to becoming a cautionary saga. So you capture the fire, carry it with you in stone form, and hope it stays warm through the night. But Vikings didn't stop with heated rocks. They had other tricks up their frostbitten sleeves. You spot someone pouring warm water into a clay jug and tucking it under their bedding. Same concept, different material. And if the water freezes by morning, well, at least it tried. Every household seems to have its own method. Clay, stone, even thick animal horn containers filled with hot broth, used more for heating than drinking. You step outside briefly, not willingly of course, but because someone asked for more snow to cool a pot and you drew the short straw. The cold hits like a slap, but this time you have a warm stone in your cloak pocket. You grip it tightly as it radiates calm into your palm. The wind still bites. Your nose still goes numb, but there's a tiny ember of warmth with you, and somehow that changes everything. When you return, someone's laying hot rocks into a flat iron pan and placing damp linen over them. Steam rises. It's a rudimentary humidifier, or maybe just laundry. Either way, it smells better than most things in the longhouse. They use stones for cooking too. Flat rocks set near the fire serve as slow griddles. There's something poetic about it. The same thing that heats your feet also toasts your breakfast. Efficiency meets survival. Later, as the sky darkens again and the wind rattles the thatched roof, you settle into your fur pile with 2 hot stones tucked, one at your chest, one at your feet. They're not flashy, but they're dependable. You can almost feel your blood moving better, your fingers staying looser, your face not quite aching. It's funny. Of all the things you imagined about Viking survival, the swords, the storms, the screaming, what comforts you most tonight is a warm rock under a scratchy blanket. No glowing thermostat, no flick of a switch, just earth and fire, partnered in a quiet rebellion against the cold. You close your eyes, pull the fur close, and feel the heat slowly fading. It won't last forever. But for now, it's enough. You wake to the sound of soft chanting. Not singing exactly, not cheerful, but rhythmic, low, and old. The kind of sound that's been passed down so long it no longer remembers who first spoke it. You blink your eyes open. It's still dark, but the kind of dark that's starting to loosen its grip. A greyness is pushing through the smoke-stained air, hinting that somewhere beyond the longhouse walls, the sun is trying to remember how to rise. The chanting continues. A woman, draped in layers of wool and bone jewellery, stands near the hearth. She's holding a carved wooden staff topped with what looks like a tuft of horsehair. You realise you're witnessing a ritual, quiet and subtle. Nothing like the epic ceremonies you'd imagined in Viking lore. There's no thunderclap, no lightning, no animal sacrifice. Just soft murmuring, faint smoke, and a tiny bowl of what might be herbs or ash. Around her neck hangs an iron pendant shaped like a hammer. Thor's hammer, Mjolnir, more than a fashion statement. It's a shield against the cold spirits. You sit up slowly, trying not to make a sound. Others in the longhouse stay still, watching through half-lidded eyes. This isn't a performance, it's a prayer. A plea. A way to push back against the creeping cold that presses in from all sides. Because the Norse didn't just build fires and huddle under furs, they waged spiritual war against winter itself. This is your first real glimpse into the mythology of surviving a Viking winter. The cold wasn't just a temperature, it was a force. A presence, a monster with icy claws and a hunger for breath. In the stories, frost giants, Jotnar, were more than fairy tale villains. They were symbols of winter's crushing indifferent power. You weren't just keeping warm, you were keeping the giants out. The woman dips her fingers into the ash and marks a symbol on the wooden beam nearest the hearth. It looks like a rune. Jagged, deliberate. Protection, maybe. Defense, maybe even binding. You've seen these runes all over the longhouse, carved into walls, scratched into beams, even burned into leather straps. The Norse believed these symbols held power. Magic, yes, but practical magic. Magic you could carve with a blade, whisper into fire, or bury under the doorway to keep out death. You remember one near your sleeping spot, an Algi's rune, the one shaped like a pitchfork or a tree with outstretched arms. It's often translated as protection or warding. You'd thought it was just decoration. Now you realise it's a line in the sand. A don't cross here etched into timber. And here comes your historical anchor. Seeresses, or völur, held a respected role in Norse society, particularly in matters of winter survival. They were believed to communicate with the gods and the spirits, offering guidance, rituals and protection through charms and foresight. While not all Viking homes had a vulva in residence, many sought their help, especially in the face of illness, harsh weather or bad omens. Winter, with its endless darkness and creeping dread, was a season thick with both real and imagined threats. You didn't just need fire, you needed favour. You shift closer to the fire, watching the woman now as she tosses something into the flames. It hisses and flares briefly, releasing a sharp, piney scent. You think it might be juniper, or possibly dried bones. Who knows anymore? The others stay quiet, respectful, not out of fear exactly, but reverence. Like this is part of the longhouse's structure. Timber, clay, fire and ritual. Then she speaks, louder now. You don't catch all the words, but one repeats, Fimbulvetter. You've heard it whispered a few times already since the cold deepened. The name of the mythic great winter that's said to precede Ragnarok, the end of the world. Fimbulvetter is no ordinary season. It's 3 years of snow and darkness. No summer in between. A deep freeze so profound that the gods themselves start to panic. And here's the unsettling part. When winters are particularly cruel, people begin to wonder, is this the start of it? You begin to notice the little rituals scattered throughout the longhouse. Someone hangs an amulet above the door, a small carved face meant to scare off wandering spirits. Another person checks the bundle of herbs tied to the central beam, mugwort, yarrow, dried rowan. Protective plants chosen not for their scent but their symbolism. Even the way the sleeping furs are folded has a method, forming a crude knot pattern believed to trap bad dreams. You thought you were here to survive cold, but you're also surviving fear. Now for your fringe fact of the night. Some scholars believe that certain Viking homes had sirit rooms or designated spatas, tiny nooks or corners, meant to house ancestral spirits or landvetir, local land spirits. Offerings of butter, ale, or even just a whisper of thanks were left to keep them pleased. These spirits, they believed, helped protect the home from misfortune, including the deadly bite of winter. There's not a lot of hard evidence, but oral tradition, sagas, and regional folklore all hint at these hidden protectors. You watch as one of the children takes a bit of yesterday's barley mash and gently places it on a flat stone near the hearth. No one eats it. No one moves it. That's an offering, and even the rats seem to know better than to touch it. And of course, this is where debate flares among the academic types. Was all this spiritual defence widespread, or just regional superstition? Some argue that the Vikings, practical as they were, didn't bother with charms unless they had extra time. Others insist that magic and religion were woven into everyday life, and especially into survival tactics. When the sun disappears for weeks, and the wind howls like it's trying to speak, even the most rational mind starts looking for protection in symbols and smoke. Later in the day, the woman takes her staff and walks the perimeter of the longhouse, murmuring again. You think it might be a blessing, or maybe a banishment. She pauses at the door and places a stone marked with runes just inside the threshold. Another boundary. Another no-pass line for whatever spirits might be swirling in the snow beyond. As night falls again, you find yourself clutching your little pouch of warmed stones tighter and glancing at the nearest beam to check for its runes. You're not even sure what you believe, but the cold is creeping in again, and the dark feels too thick to ignore. You lie down under your cloak, press your warm stone to your chest, and close your eyes. Not just hoping for sleep, but for safety, from the cold, from the dark, and from whatever ancient force watches through the cracks in the timber. And if someone whispers a blessing toward you before the fire goes out, you don't argue. It's the smoke that wakes you this time. Thick, acrid, swilling like a rude ghost, curling under your nose and into your throat. You cough, half asleep, eyes watering before they even open. The air in the longhouse feels different, heavier, maybe wetter. You blink up toward the rafters and realise the smoke isn't drifting out of the roof hole like usual. It's hanging, hovering, clinging. The fire is still going, barely. But the smoke has nowhere to go. That's when you remember. Viking longhouses didn't have chimneys. Not really. There might be a smoke hole in the roof, but it's more of a suggestion than a solution. No flue, no vent, no cosy brick stack to draw the air upward. Instead, the smoke just wanders. Some nights it finds its way out. Other nights, like tonight, it gets stuck and decides to keep everyone company. You sit up, squinting through the haze. You're breathing in centuries of tradition, and probably a good deal of lung damage. No one else seems especially panicked. Someone by the hearth is poking the fire with a long stick, coaxing the embers back to life. A few others stir in their bedding, coughing, or rolling away from the smoke like it's an annoying roommate. You're the only one looking around like the house might be on fire. This apparently is just another Tuesday. But let's be clear, this is one of the most dangerous parts of Viking winter survival. The open hearth is your lifeline, but also your slow, smoky death if you're not careful. There's no carbon monoxide detector here, no emergency ventilation. The walls are sealed tight against the cold with moss and mud. The roof's thatched and low. The air stagnates. If you burn the wrong thing, too much damp peat, not enough oxygen, you risk poisoning everyone in the building, and they wouldn't even know it until it was too late. You crawl toward the door for a breath of fresher air, lifting the heavy wool curtain that separates indoors from everything else. A blast of icy wind slaps you in the face. You lean out just long enough to gulp a few lungfuls of clean, bitter air, your eyes watering now for a different reason, and then you duck back in, shivering. It's a brutal trade, fresh air or warmth. You can't have both. One of the older men finally stands and takes a long pole to prod open the roof vent. He jabs at it a few times, knocking loose a bit of snow that spills onto the floor. The smoke begins to rise again reluctantly. A sluggish draft forms, dragging the worst of it upward. Slowly, mercifully, the air starts to clear. You flop back onto your bedding like you just escaped a chimney sweep's coffin. Now here's a hard historical truth. Viking longhouses were smoke traps. They were designed for warmth, not airflow. Heat retention was everything. Smoke was tolerated, maybe even weaponized. There's a theory that the smoke acted as a kind of fumigator, killing off pests in the straw, driving away insects, and even curing meats that hung in the rafters. Think of it as the Viking version of multitasking. Heat your house, smoke your sausage, and kill your lice all at once. You glance upward and spot the familiar silhouettes of drying meat and fish swinging gently near the beams. The smoke curls around them like a lover. Down below, you're wondering if your own lungs are being preserved too. The people here have adaptations. They know how to angle the fire. They know which bricks burn cleaner, which wood smokes less, which direction to crack the door when things get bad. One woman soaks a cloth and ties it over her mouth as she works near the hearth. Another child holds a damp rag to their nose until the worst passes. These aren't fire safety measures, they're just life. Still, the smoke gets into everything: your clothes, your hair, your bedding, even your skin starts to carry that sharp, sooty tang. You've been living in the fire's breath for days now, and it's become part of you. You scratch at your arm absently and notice a faint black smear. You're basically a walking incense stick. And while some historians argue that longhouses must have had better ventilation, secret slats, adjustable roof openings, or even hidden flues, there's no universal agreement. Most reconstructions show that yes, the smoke just lingered. Some think the rafters were left partially open. Others believe that ceiling height and fire placement created a sort of layering. Smoke above, breathable air below. That's why you always sleep low, sit low, and work close to the floor. You live in the breathable 2 feet of air beneath the smoke line. Welcome to horizontal living. But here's the fringe theory of the day. Some researchers believe Viking families intentionally kept a smoke shelf in the upper part of the longhouse. A sort of thick air barrier where the smoke would collect and stay, because smoke itself acted as insulation. It warmed the thatch, it kept out snowmelt, it even discouraged birds from nesting up there. Basically, a house full of smoke was safer and warmer than one full of holes. It's strange logic, but in this world, strange logic often wins. As the day stretches forward, the smoke thins. The fire burns hotter now, cleaner, with dry peat and a few precious wood chips. You realise how finely balanced everything is. Too little fuel and you freeze, too much and you suffocate. It's not just firekeeping, it's an art form, it's chemistry, it's survival math done in the back of your mind while you stir stew or patch socks or chew on a piece of dried cod. Later that afternoon, a breeze picks up outside, howling through the thatch. You hear the rafters groan, the wind pushing against the smoke hole, threatening to drive everything back inside. Someone quickly shoves a cloth into the gap, then carefully pulls it back when the gust passes. This is a dance, and everyone knows the steps. Night falls again, dragging its cold claws over the longhouse roof. You settle back into your bedding, fur tight around your shoulders, one warmed stone at your feet. The fire is steady now, and the smoke floats gently upward, curling like a lazy ghost through the open vent. You breathe deep, still smoky, still rough, but breathable. And for tonight, that's enough. You're lying still, half dozing under a mound of wool and fur, when nature calls with the cruel timing of a prankster gall. Not the kind of call you can ignore either. The full, urgent, bodily betrayal that demands immediate attention, regardless of time, temperature, or mental readiness. You groan softly, hoping someone else will move first. No one does. Everyone's asleep or pretending to be, cowards. You peel back the fur and brace for it. The walk of shame to the Viking bathroom, which, spoiler alert, isn't a bathroom. The air outside your blanket is vicious. You sit up slowly, blinking through the smoke-dim light, then fumble for your boots. They're stiff with yesterday's moisture, the kind of cold that makes them feel like slabs of meat. You shove your feet in anyway, wincing. You wrap your cloak tightly, grab the small torch from near the fire, and make your way toward the corner. There it is, the infamous toilet bucket. Calling it a bucket feels generous. It's a wooden vessel with a crude lid lined with straw to soak up moisture, and some powdery stuff that smells like herbs, likely crushed juniper or pine needles. It's functional, barely, but this isn't a permanent setup. It's a nighttime emergency solution, a compromise between dignity and not freezing your internal organs while relieving yourself. You look around. Still no volunteers to join you in suffering. Of course not. If it's early in the night, the bucket is manageable. If it's morning, well, let's just say the contents are communal, and heavy, and possibly sloshing. But right now it's just you, the bucket, and your eternal regret. You kneel beside it, do what needs doing, then seal the lid again with the kind of reverence usually reserved for cursed artifacts. But that's just the beginning. Because eventually that bucket needs to be emptied. You already did it yesterday. Today's someone else's turn, supposedly. Eventually you hear it. The dreaded scrape of wood on wood as someone slides the bucket across the floor. A grunt, a muttered curse. You sit up slightly to watch the poor soul wrap themselves in layers, grab the bucket's side handles, and trudge out the front flap into the frozen blackness. There's no sympathy, just the shared knowledge that tomorrow it might be you again. Now let's talk about what happens outside. There's no outhouse, not in the modern sense. No heated seat, no privacy, just a designated waste trench, dug far enough from the longhouse to avoid contaminating water or attracting rats too close to home. It's usually shielded with a few planks or a windbreak of piled stones, barely shelter, but it blocks some wind. The path to it is icy, slick, and worn into the snow by repeated, reluctant use. Waste disposal wasn't just unpleasant, it was dangerous. In deep winter, stepping outside at night meant risking frostbite or injury. Many Viking communities planned accordingly, using chamber pots or night buckets indoors, and only dumping them at the dawn when the sun gave some illusion of mercy. The waste trench would be packed with straw or ash to control smell and slow the freezing process. That is, until it froze solid into a grotesque monument of survival. Historical records are slim when it comes to bathroom details, because let's face it, nobody was writing poetry about their 3 a.m. snow poop adventures, but archaeological digs have turned up latrine pits near longhouses, sometimes with layers of human and animal waste dating back centuries. In some cases, these middens, yes, that's the technical word, reveal traces of parasites, dietary patterns, and general hardship. One study of Norse Greenlanders found that even during peak settlement periods, most people had chronic intestinal worms, because of course they did. Nothing says cosy winter like fire-roasted dried fish and internal parasites. Back inside the longhouse, the air still carries the faint scent of juniper and something else. You pretend not to notice. Everyone pretends. Waste is part of life. You share everything here. Space, heat, stories, and yes, even the smell. But here comes your fringe fact of the night. There's some speculation that wealthier households had slightly more advanced sanitation systems, such as stone chutes or sloped channels that directed waste away from the longhouse, kind of a proto-plumbing situation. Whether these were designed purely for hygiene or for winter convenience is still debated, but the idea of a Viking engineer sitting around and inventing a poop slide? Beautiful, absolutely beautiful. There's also evidence that animal dung and human waste were sometimes mixed and composted with straw for later use as fertilizer, when they weren't burning it, that is. Efficient? Yes. Gross? Also yes. By mid-morning, someone decides the bucket needs replacing. You watch as a second cleaner vessel is brought forward and placed on the stone platform, the used one, covered with a cloth, carried with arms extended, and placed outside in the snow to freeze solid before disposal. You now understand why nobody keeps diaries from this time period. It's hard to get poetic about a frozen poop pail. Still, as much as it all feels like some medieval punishment, there's a strange logic to it. Everything has a purpose. Every gross, uncomfortable part of winter life fits into the bigger survival strategy. Waste management may not be glorious, but it keeps the inside livable, keeps disease at bay, keeps rats from staging a full coup. It's not about comfort. It's about containment. You realise with a weird kind of pride that you're adjusting. You no longer flinch at the smell or gag at the cold or panic at the thought of walking out into the wind with a sloshing bucket. You're still horrified, yes, but you're functioning. You even find a spot near the hearth where the smoke seems thinner, the air a little warmer, and sit with your mug of weak ale, feeling almost civilised. You survived another night, another indignity, another round of biological betrayal in the middle of a Viking winter. And honestly, that might be the most heroic thing you've done yet. It's the middle of the day, or at least you think it is. Time gets slippery here. There's no sunbeam breaking through a window, no glowing clock face to anchor you. Just the same smoky twilight leaking through the roof vent. The same orange flicker of firelight. And the slow, methodical pace of everyone inside doing exactly what they did yesterday. And the day before. Welcome to the polar night, where the sun forgets to show up and your brain quietly unspools in the dark. You pull your cloak tighter, rubbing your hands for warmth. The fire's burning well, the air's not too smoky, and there's even a hint of something cooking. Still you feel off, like the world's stuck on pause. And that's no accident. In these northern latitudes, deep winter doesn't just mean cold, it means darkness. Days when the sun never rises above the horizon, when light bleeds sideways at best, and when night stretches out like an old, tired god that won't go home, it messes with you. Vikings didn't call it seasonal affective disorder, but they knew something was up. People got sluggish, sad, angry, sleepy at all the wrong times. Some would spend most of the day wrapped in cloaks, barely moving. Others kept busy, obsessively carving wood or cleaning tools, as if trying to outrun the night closing in from the corners of the room. There's no rhythm to follow anymore, no morning light, no noon to break the day, no evening golden hour to tell you it's time to slow down. Time is measured by chores and hunger, by when someone stokes the fire, when someone else pours another round of sour ale, and sometimes time just disappears. You blink, and it's been hours. To fight it, the household has rituals, morning songs for one, low, humming chants sung while preparing breakfast. Someone claps a slow rhythm, others join in. It's not for performance, it's anchoring. A kind of self-made timekeeping that reminds everyone we're still here. You listen quietly as they begin one now, an old tune with a repeating chorus, soft and hypnotic. You can't understand the words, but you feel them. Later, the woman you've come to think of as the matriarch starts a round of chores that make no logical sense. She moves bundles of straw from one side of the longhouse to the other, sorts fish by length, rearranges tools that haven't been touched in days. She's not losing it. She's trying to shake off the dark, keep the mind moving. You join in, because doing something feels better than doing nothing. You help a boy count out lengths of twine. There's no reason, no project waiting. Just counting. He grins like it's a game. Maybe it is. And here's the science behind your brain soup. Modern researchers have studied how long-term darkness affects cognition and mood. In Arctic regions, people experience sleep disruption, memory fog and mood swings, not just because of light deprivation, but because the body's internal clock can't sync properly without solar cues. Even your digestion slows, your core temperature drops, your body starts to hibernate whether you asked it to or not. Now imagine that, but in a world with no clocks, no electricity, and no backup supply of vitamin D gummies. The Vikings had to tough it out, bodily or mentally and emotionally. They didn't know what melatonin was, but they knew when their kids started sleeping through the day, or when tempers flared for no reason, the dark had crept in too deep. Some longhouses countered this with extra firelight, torches, fat lamps, even reflective metal or polished bone used to bounce light around the room. You can see that at play here. Someone's propped a thin sheet of hammered bronze behind a whale oil lamp, directing a stronger glow toward the sleeping area. It's rudimentary but clever. Others leaned on structure. The day is carved into strict roles: morning chores, midday meal, evening weaving, night prayer. Even if the light doesn't change, the actions do. A kind of psychological scaffolding built to carry you over the abyss. You try it yourself, standing up every hour, counting each sip of broth, measuring how long you can sit still before your thoughts start to slide sideways. It helps, a little. And here's your fringe theory for today. Some believe Vikings practiced a kind of intentional second sleep. The idea is that people went to bed early, shortly after nightfall, then woke up again around midnight for a few quiet hours of talk, prayer, or even visiting neighbours, before going back to sleep until morning. In the endless dark of winter, this kind of split sleep may have helped break up the monotony and provided a mental reset. Was it widespread? We don't know. But it makes a strange kind of sense, especially in a world where clocks don't exist and midnight can stretch for what feels like years. There's also storytelling. Longhouse evenings are built on it. You sit near the hearth as someone begins a tale, something with wolves and gods and someone losing a hand in a bet. The room shifts. People turn toward the fire. The storyteller's voice rises and falls, hands gesturing through the smoke. The story has rhythm, drama, light. It becomes a kind of daylight in your mind. You feel your heart lift, your spine straighten, your breath deepen. Because stories do something the fire can't. They push back against despair. They fill the longhouse with warmth that doesn't depend on peat or dung. And most of all, they pass time. And time, when you're surviving the long dark, is the most precious thing of all. Afterward, someone claps once, sharply. The room exhales. Cloaks shift. Sleep calls again. You lie down under your pile of furs, stones warm at your feet, and try to remember what day it is, what month, what year. None of it feels solid. But the fire still burns, the song still lingers, and your eyes, heavy and dry, finally close. Not because it's night, but because your body says it's time, and in this endless dark, that's enough. You wake to shouting, not the usual quiet grumbling or the sleep-drunk coughing that fills the longhouse on most mornings, but real voices, loud, rough, and urgent. It takes a moment to claw your way out from under the layers of fur and wool, your body still half committed to sleep. The air smells different too. Still smoky, still damp, but richer, warmer, and unmistakably meaty. Someone's cooking, but more than just the usual soup or barley paste. You sit up and sniff again. That's roast, real meat, big meat. You haven't smelled anything like this since, well, ever. By the time you push through the haze and blink toward the fire, the longhouse has transformed. The central hearth is alive with flame, bigger than usual, and surrounded by people in motion. Clay pots are bubbling. A whole pig, or at least most of one, is roasting over the fire, dripping fat that hisses as it hits the coals. There are herbs too, crushed and tossed onto the meat, filling the air with a wild, earthy perfume that feels utterly decadent after weeks of smoked fish and barley slop. This isn't a regular meal. This is an event, a feast. You learn quickly that today marks the height of the Viking winter ritual season. You've stumbled into Yule, the original 12-day winter party, and a deeply spiritual, wildly chaotic time that blends survival with celebration. Think of it as the Norse answer to winter despair. When the nights are longest and the world seems frozen solid, you throw a fire-lit, meat-dripping, song-drenched festival just to say, not today, frost giants. And no, this isn't about gifting and Santa Claus. This is older, deeper. Here, Yule is equal parts survival strategy and sacred offering. You eat the best of what you saved, not because you're feeling generous, but because if you don't remind the gods and yourself that you're still alive, you might forget. And besides, if things go south later this winter, you'll be grateful you celebrated now. You help arrange the meal and it's not just meat. Flatbreads are being toasted on hot stones, dried berries rehydrated in honeyed water, nuts cracked open, and mead passed in carefully guarded wooden mugs. It's a luxury spread, probably the largest amount of real food this longhouse will see until spring. Some of it is traded, some hoarded, some secretly preserved for this exact moment. It's bold, risky, delicious. People are dressed a little differently. 2. Tunics cleaned and brushed, beads and brooches brought out from storage, fur cloaks pinned with their shiniest buckles. There's laughter. Laughter. Real loud, echoing laughter that bounces off the rafters and makes the cows in the corner snort in confusion. Children are dancing around the fire, more spinning and flailing than actual steps. And even the grumpiest elders seem less frozen today. You notice a small pile of bones near the fire, carefully chosen, cleaned and arranged. These are offerings, placed before a carved wooden figure near the far wall. It's not ornate, just a stout idol carved with a stern, bearded face. Could be Thor, could be Odin. Nobody tells you and you don't ask. Someone places a slice of meat before it, murmurs a short blessing, then pours a splash of mead into a hollowed-out stone cup at its base. And here's your historical anchor for the feast. Yule, or Jol, was a pre-Christian midwinter festival that honoured the gods, the ancestors, and the return of the sun. The name would later be borrowed by Christmas, but its roots are much older. It often involved ritual sacrifices, animals, food, even toasts, given in hope of good luck and fertility in the coming year. In some cases, a wild boar would be sacrificed to Freya, the god of peace and prosperity, and oaths sworn upon its bristles. Today this longhouse is doing a less dramatic version, but the spirit remains. As the meal begins, you sit cross-legged near the fire with a plate full of food you don't deserve. Salted pork, honeyed oats, warm bread with wild butter. It's rich, savoury, perfect. You chew slowly, half afraid it's a dream. This is the first time in days your stomach feels not just full, but happy. There's warmth in your limbs. Even your brain seems to clear. You're not just surviving today, you're participating. That's the key. These feasts weren't just indulgence, they were rebellion. Against the cold, against the dark, against the hunger scratching at the door every night. You celebrate so winter doesn't win. Then comes the fire ritual. As the food simmers and plates are scraped clean, a bonfire is lit outside. Yes, outside. People bundle up in cloaks and mittens, carrying torches through the snow, forming a slow, deliberate line toward a cleared area near the animal pens. You follow, breath-fogging, hands numb despite the heatstone you tucked into your belt. A tall pile of wooden brush weights, soaked in animal fat and resin. A man steps forward, holding a carved torch, and calls out words that you don't understand but feel in your bones. Then, whoosh, the fire erupts, roaring to life. The snow around it melts in seconds, steam rising like breath from the earth. Sparks shoot upward, dancing into the night sky. It's breathtaking, primal, perfect. You stand in the circle, watching the fire rage, and feel something ancient move inside your chest. Not warmth exactly, defiance. As if the flame is saying, you can take our crops, our fingers, even our hope, but you don't get our stories. People cheer. They start singing again, louder this time. A song full of strange vowels and pounding rhythm. Some beat drums, others clap or stomp. Someone throws a piece of sausage into the flames, laughing. It smells amazing. And here's your fringe fact for the night. There are whispers in Norse folklore about Yule ghosts, spirits of the dead who walk during the festival, either visiting loved ones or seeking warmth. Some households would set extra places at the feast table, or leave food near the hearth to appease them. Others feared them, especially the darker ones, like the Yollakut Turin, the monstrous Yule cat that devoured those who hadn't received new clothes before the solstice. Tonight, nobody mentions ghosts, but a few people leave uneaten scraps near the door, just in case. Eventually the crowd filters back into the longhouse, firelight clinging to their cheeks, laughter still buzzing like static. The children collapse into piles of fur. The mead flows slower now. You lie back down, full for the first time in weeks, and stare up at the smoky rafters. The fire still burns, the cold still waits. But tonight, you remember what it feels like to be alive. By the next morning, the fire's been reduced to a sulky pile of ash and half-burned logs, and you've been reduced to a human-shaped bag of groans. Your head aches. Your stomach is performing a slow, dramatic protest. Your tongue feels like someone used it to mop up the bottom of a mead barrel. You open one eye and immediately regret it. Someone is singing, badly, off-key and far too early for this. It's the aftermath of the Yule feast, and the longhouse looks like it survived a battle. Cloaks are strewn across benches, bits of bread and dried meat litter the floor, and a man is snoring face down in what might have once been a basket of kindling. Congratulations, you've officially had your first Viking hangover. You sit up groaning and realise someone's moving with alarming energy across the room. A man, tall, wrapped in fur and leather, hair pulled back with a bit of twine, is lifting what looks like a shield. A real heavy wooden shield, scratched and marked from what was probably several real, heavy, not-so-friendly uses. He's not cleaning it, he's training. You blink. You were under the impression winter was about hiding from death, not inviting it in for push-ups. But this man, one of the local warriors or huskarls, has no interest in hibernation. While everyone else recovers from the feast, he's practicing stances, moving through drills with his axe and shield like it's the middle of summer. Muscles coiled, eyes focused, steam rising from his breath in sharp puffs. You find yourself shivering just watching him. The cold clearly got the memo about winter. He did not. You ask, why now? Why this? And you learn quickly that Viking warriors don't stop for winter. If anything, winter is the proving ground. It's when the weak fall off, the strong sharpen themselves, and the truly insane grab their weapons and head out into the blizzards to fight each other for fun. You've heard the word before, berserker, a kind of warrior that fought with frenzied strength, fearless and often half-naked. At first it sounded like a legend, but here, watching this man pace through the snow outside with no cloak and steam rising off his bare arms, it feels a little too real. He's training in sub-zero temperatures like his blood is made of dragon mead. You're wrapped in 3 layers and still shaking. He's grinning. The concept of the berserkir, those elite, frenzied fighters, wasn't just poetic. They were feared, respected, and often kept slightly apart from the rest of society. Not because they were mystical beasts, but because they were terrifying. And winter didn't tame them. It made them more dangerous. With little to do and battles still in their blood, they trained harder, fought mock duels, and kept their edge sharp. You suddenly understand why the rest of the village gives them a wide berth. But here's your historical truth bomb. The sagas describe berserkers entering a trance-like rage, called berserk's ganga, where they felt no pain, no fear, and seemed immune to wounds. Some modern scholars think they may have used herbal stimulants, like henbane or fly agaric mushrooms, to fuel these rages. Others think it was psychological, a warrior's mental armour forged in trauma and ritual. There's no clear consensus. All you know is, that man outside just punched a snowdrift and yelled at it like it owed him money. The longhouse slowly stirs to life. People start clearing dishes, sweeping up ash, and trying to unstick their limbs from whatever surfaces they fell asleep on. You offer to help with repairs because the feast did more damage than anticipated. A stool is cracked, a beam needs patching. The floor near the fire pit looks like it's been stepped on by 30 drunk oxen. You work beside a young woman tightening the lashings on a wooden spar. She tells you this is typical. A feast is celebration, yes, but also wear and tear, and recovery is part of the rhythm. You step outside to fetch more straw for the floor, and the cold hits harder than usual. It's bright, almost painfully so, the sauna reflecting the dim winter light like a sea of glass shards. In the distance, 2 young men are sparring with wooden staves, not fighting to win, just keeping sharp. Nearby, someone throws a spear into a frozen stump over and over. You realise that in a world without gyms, drills are a survival habit. Winter is training season. And here's your fringe detail of the day. There's evidence that Viking warriors engaged in winter raids, not as often as during summer, but enough to matter. Some sagas mention surprise attacks on neighbouring settlements during winter, when others were least prepared. It was risky, of course, snow, staves, frozen seas, but the payoff was high. No one expects a raiding party when they're huddled by the hearth, so the bold, or the desperate, put on their furs, sharpened their blades and rode out anyway, because why wait for spring when there's silver to be stolen and glory to be had? You return to the longhouse with an armful of straw and a head full of questions. Why train in the cold? Why risk it? Why not rest? And the answer, whispered through gritted teeth and clenched jaws, is simple. Winter is not a break, it's a crucible. The weak grow softer, the strong grow sharper, and those who want to see another spring learn how to move through the cold, not hide from it. You spread the straw near the hearth, where the fire's back to a steady glow. Someone pours you a ladle of warm broth, and you drink it slowly, watching the warrior finally return, sweat steaming from his skin like a man walking out of a sauna made of nightmares. You lie down again, not to sleep, but to process. You've been surviving winter like it's a cage, but the Vikings, some of them treat it like a proving ground. And you start to wonder, if the cold doesn't break you, maybe it reforges you. You're rubbing warmth into your fingers near the hearth when something cold and sharp smacks into the side of your face. It's a snowball. A real, perfectly packed snowball that somehow found its way through the front curtain and across half the longhouse before landing squarely on your cheek. You look up, stunned as laughter erupts, high-pitched and shameless. A group of kids bolt out the door, already shrieking with joy before you can even register what just happened. Your face is wet. Your pride is wounded. And now you're invested. You throw on your boots, grab your cloak, and charge after them. Outside, the light is soft and hazy, winter's version of mid-morning. The snow is deep and uneven, with trails of tiny footprints and scattered impressions from where the kids have been flinging themselves into the drifts. They've turned the whole yard into a battleground. Snow forts built from packed blocks, tree branches sticking out like makeshift flags, and half-formed snowmen that look more like abstract sculpture than anything human. You spot the ringleader, maybe 8 or 9 years old, already winding up another snowball with the kind of precision that should probably be outlawed. You duck just in time. This is play, yes, but it's also something else. Training, movement, survival disguised as buffoon fun. These kids aren't just being cute, they're learning the skills they'll need in a few years when the sickle stakes get real. Coordination, teamwork, endurance in the cold, how to keep moving when your fingers go numb and the snow in your boots turns your toes into icicles. You don't realise it right away, but this game is preparing them for life, and possibly someday for battle. You lob a snowball at one of the older boys and immediately get pelted in return by 2 smaller kids who apparently didn't appreciate your betrayal. Your side gets wet, your feet go out from under you, and you land with a breath-stealing whuff into a pile of powder. The kids cheer. You surrender with your hands up, gasping and grinning like a fool. You feel awake again, awake in a way that hasn't happened in days. The cold in your lungs stings, but it's alive. Back inside the longhouse once the battle ends and the winners brag for a full 15 minutes longer than necessary, you strip off your soaked outer layer and settle by the fire again. The kids join you, huddled under a shared fur, pink-cheeked and dripping. Someone passes around warm porridge, thickened with milk and honey. And even the adults are smiling now. The snowball war lifted something that's been sagging for days. You ask about games and find out that Vikings didn't just tolerate play, they respected it. Children were expected to be useful, sure. They helped with chores, fetched water, tended animals, but the woods were also encouraged to be tough, smart and resourceful. Play was how they got there. There were games of strength, arm wrestling, tug-of-war and stick-pulling. Think of it as medieval CrossFit. There were also strategy games, wooden boards carved with grids, bone tokens passed between hands, mock battles planned and executed with the seriousness of real campaigns. And when the snow came, everything turned into an arena. You learn that sledding wasn't just fun, it was skill building. Ice skating, done with bones strapped to boots, and yes, it may travel faster over frozen rivers. Snowball fights, wrestling matches, even sliding down slopes on an animal hides. Every moment of joy doubled as training. The harshness of the world meant that childhood wasn't a pause before adulthood. It was preparation. And here's your historical fact to file away. Viking sagas often mention games played by children and young adults, including sports like Natleika, a kind of ball game that involved bats, a hard ball, no written rules and frequent injuries. Think rugby meets baseball meets chaos. It was played in fields on ice, and sometimes ended in blood. It wasn't just tolerated, it was celebrated. A strong child became a strong adult. A fearless child, a future warrior. You glance over and see one of the kids carving a small figure out of wood. Maybe a horse or a dragon, it's hard to tell. He's using a dull blade and all his focus. No one tells him to stop. He's learning patience, detail, control. Another is braiding cord from scraps of wool, making something that might become a sling or a belt. It's all training, quiet, sneaky training, that teaches hands to work, eyes to focus, minds to stay sharp even in the slow drag of winter. Of course, not every lesson is clean. One of the smaller girls lifts a cat by the middle and promptly gets scratched across the hand. She yelps, drops it, dödses, then looks down at the blood with mild curiosity before wandering off to show her grandmother. You brace for tears. There are none. The older woman glances at the wound, nods, and wraps it with a strip of wool like it's just another Tuesday, which, in Viking winter terms, it is. You think about the children you know in your time. Cartoons, juice boxes, snow days called off because someone saw a flake on the weather report. These Viking kids, they'd laugh themselves breathless. They're climbing fences, shoving each other into snowbanks, and figuring out what happens when you try to chew on icicles the size of your arm. All of it is messy, painful, and wildly effective. And here's your fringe fact. Some Norse communities believed in testing a child's resilience intentionally. Not in a cruel way, but in a let's see what you can handle kind of way. A minor chore might involve carrying a bucket too heavy. A lesson might include being dunked in snow and told to find your way back inside. Not punishment, preparation. In their minds, the world outside was cruel. Teaching softness was setting a child up to die young. Teaching strength, even through discomfort, was love. By evening, the children have collapsed in a heap near the hearth. Worn out from the day's games and small skirmishes, one of them snores like a miniature ox. Another is still carving that little horse, eyes drooping, hands steady. You lie down beside the fire, sore from slipping on ice and still brushing snow out of your hood. But there's something warm in your chest, not just the heat, though that helps. It's the realization that even here in the darkest, most brutal corner of the year, joy finds a way in, not in spite of the cold, but because of it. You close your eyes, and the last thing you hear is a sleepy child whispering something about the snow monster they invented today. You don't correct them, you just smile, because even in Viking winter, kids will be kids. You're up early today, if early means anything anymore, which it really doesn't. The sky is still dark, the fire's down to embers, and the only sound is the steady breathing of 30-something people wrapped in furs, scattered across benches and floors like a battlefield of exhausted blankets. But you can't sleep, not because you're cold, surprisingly. You're not. You've actually learned how to trap the warmth under your layers now. Stones near the feet, cloak under your back, fur around the shoulders, and absolutely no movement unless it's worth the effort. No, you're awake because you're itchy. Scratchy. Itchy in a new way. You sit up, run your fingers across your arms, and then scratch more aggressively. Your tunic crackles faintly, and not in a good warming by the fire way. More like a you've been sleeping in straw and sweating under goat fur for days way. The straw. You groan. You know it's the straw, because here's the truth you've been ignoring. Your bed is full of grass. You peel back the furs and crouch down, lifting the edge of the sleeping platform to peek underneath. Yep, straw. Dry, yellow, crinkly stuff, flattened and packed into a shallow wooden trough beneath your bedding. It's everywhere. It's in your socks, your tunic hem, your hood. You're basically sleeping on a livestock buffet. But this straw, rough as it is one of the reasons you haven't frozen to death yet. Straw is insulation. You don't think of it that way in the modern world. To you, it's the decorative fluff people stack on porches in the fall before throwing it away after Halloween. But here, it's a survival material. Lightweight, dry, breathable. It creates a buffer between you and the frozen earth. And if packed tightly enough, it holds in heat and lets out moisture. Magic. Not quite. Science? Absolutely. You lift a clump and give it a sniff, not awful, faintly barn-like, but you notice something else. Movement. Tiny movement. Something small and fast scurrying through the lower layers. And now your skin's really crawling. Welcome to the joy of lice, and straw mites, and probably fleas, because as amazing as straw is at keeping you warm, it's also the Airbnb of the pest world. You start scratching again and remember the boy from 2 nights ago baking his shirt over the fire to smoke out the fleas. You'd laughed. Now you get it. You glance around and see a few others stirring. One woman reaches under her bedding, pulls out a bundle of straw and tosses it onto the hearth like it's on a hit list. It flares up instantly, releasing a puff of tiny black specks that you really don't want to identify. Then she replaces the straw with fresh handfuls from a bundle in the corner. She makes the swap so fast, so casually it's like brushing teeth. You help, because now you're itchy and guilty. She shows you the technique. Fluff the new straw before packing it down. Shake out the furs, let the warmth of the fire kill what the cold can't. You even spritz a bit of herbal water on the bedding, juniper again, and maybe wormwood or thyme. It smells sharp and clean, like a forest trying to fight back. And here's your historical fact for the day. Straw bedding was common throughout the Viking world, often combined with furs or rough-spun wool blankets. In wealthier homes, they might have had feather-stuffed mattress or animal skins layered in more comfort. But for the average longhouse, straw was the go-to. Cheap, replaceable, functioned. And it wasn't just for sleeping. Straw covered the floor, lined walls, even plugged drafty gaps when moss wasn't enough. It was insulation, soundproofing, bug deterrent, and floor padding all in one. But of course, there's a fringe theory too. Some scholars suggest that certain longhouses used layered bedding techniques. Straw, then animal hides, then a wooden plank, then furs, sort of a proto-mattress setup. There's even a theory that some wealthier families heated stones and buried them under the straw to create a kind of radiant floor heating. Not confirmed, but not impossible. You, on the other hand, are currently sleeping on what feels like a pile of pine needles soaked in goat sweat. You get the idea to replace your own bedding straw, just to see if you sleep better. You walk outside into the morning not morning chill and grab a bundle from the dry store near the side wall. The straw is stacked like golden firewood tied in tight bundles stored under a lean-to roof to keep it dry. It crunches beautifully in your arms, fresh and earthy. You bring it back inside, sweep out the old mess, and carefully pack the new straw under your sleeping spot. And for once, you're proud of a chore. The clean bedding smells like sun, even though the sun hasn't shown its face in days. You feel like a feral animal that just discovered housework. Small victories. As you rest later that day, sprawled on your new straw mattress, the difference is immediate. Less scratching, more loft. It's not a featherbed, but it's softer. Close your eyes and imagine you're in a luxury spa made of hay and firewood. The fantasy holds for about 5 minutes before someone sneezes directly onto your back and your new clean vibe is destroyed. Still, you've learned the value of straw. And not just for bedding. You now notice it everywhere. Stuffed into cracks in the walls, woven into doormats, even wrapped around a frozen water jug to keep it from cracking. Someone is even using a hollow straw bundle as a kind of carrier for glowing embers. A portable fire starter kit. Straw is survival. Not glamorous, not permanent, but dependable. By nightfall, you're curled up again, wrapped in furs, new straw under your bones, a warm stone at your feet, and just a hint less itchy. You feel content. Not because everything's perfect, but because you've adapted, you've learned. You've started playing by the rules of this place. Rules written in ash and straw and shared body heat. And tonight, as the wind picks up again and the fire crackles low, you don't panic. You don't scratch. You just exhale into the dark and sleep like someone who's finally made peace with the floor. It starts with a curl drip. Just one, soft, slow and deliberate. Like the ceiling's testing you. At first you think it's someone pouring water, or maybe a ladle dropped into a bowl. But then you hear it again. Drip, drip, drip. You sit up dim, furs sliding off your shoulders in a quiet avalanche, and peer into the gloom above the hearth. There's moisture glistening on the thatch, a sheen of water where there should be frost. Another drip hits the stone beside the fire, sizzling into nothing, and that's when it hits you. It's thawing. Not a full melt, not yet, but the weather's shifting, just enough for the snow packed onto the roof to start weeping. Just enough for the longhouse to feel less like a dry cave and more like a sodden, wheezing lung. And in some ways, this moment is more dangerous than the deep freeze, because freeze you can prepare for, freeze is predictable. Thaw is treachery. You pull on your boots, now softer from repeated wear, and walk gingerly toward the doorway. The threshold is slick, the floor muddy near the entrance. That's new. The tightly packed snow that surrounded the longhouse for weeks has started to sag and slump. You push the curtain aside and are greeted by a sudden gust of wet, heavy air. Warmer, sure, but foul-smelling and damp, like wet wool left in a barn. Outside, the snow is sinking, not melting completely, but collapsing under its own weight, heavy with water. Icicles dangle from the eaves, fat with impending doom. You dodge one instinctively and squint toward the horizon. The sky is pale and bloated, clouds swelling with something that's not snow. You hear a trickle nearby, a miniature stream cutting its way through the snowpack toward the woods. It's beautiful, in a ruined kind of way. Back inside, people are stirring. They know the signs. A thaw in midwinter is rare, and rarely good. Too much melt too fast can spell disaster. You learn quickly that this in-between season, this strange temporary warmth is not a gift. It's a threat dressed as a blessing. The floor near the livestock pen is already showing signs of stress. The packed straw has turned to sludge, and the boards beneath are softening. Someone grabs a shovel and starts turning the muck, spreading dry hay to soak up the moisture. If that pen collapses, the animals will panic, and panic in an enclosed longhouse full of humans and fire is not a charming bedtime story. You jump in to help, and for a few hours, it's all hands on deck. The fire is stoked higher to drive off the damp. Furs are hung near the flames to dry out. Children are told, firmly, not to play near the beams dripping from above. One man climbs into the rafters to inspect the damage, muttering as he pokes at the thatch with a stick. He comes down with wet streaks on his arms and a look that says, "Not great." And here's your historical detail of the day. Viking longhouses were often constructed with turf roofs, layered over wooden planks and supported by interior beams. This design insulated well, but when the snow melted unevenly or rain snuck in during a warm spell, the whole roof could become a sponge. A dangerous 1,000-pound sponge suspended over your bed. If not maintained, roofs could sag, leak, or even collapse under the weight of waterlogged thatch. You look up again and wonder just how heavy that ceiling is. You're assigned to the drainage crew, such as it is. You help dig narrow trenches around the perimeter of the longhouse, redirecting the meltwater away from the foundation. The ground is still frozen in places, making every shovel stroke a wrist-jarring ordeal. But the work is necessary. If water pools around the base of the house and refreezes later, the ground will heave, walls will crack, doors will jam, and the whole structure will shift like a drunk trying to stand up too fast. You work in silence for a while. The only sounds the sucking squelch of mud and the hiss of water escaping into the trenches. Occasionally someone mutters about the ice breaking. You assume it's a metaphor until someone points toward the river. It's moving, not a lot. Just a few weak pulses beneath the ice like veins twitching under skin, but it's enough. The thick, silent surface has begun to fracture in places, lines spidering out from the centre. Not dangerous yet, but soon. If the thaw continues, the river could break open violently, splitting chunks of ice like glass and flooding the banks with bone-chilling runoff. And Viking settlements near rivers, like this one, have learned to respect that particular chaos. Later that day, back inside, you help reinforce one of the outer walls. Water has begun to seep in through a moss-chinked seam, and the clay packing is softening. You kneel with a few others, jamming straw and more clay into the crack while the wind pushes dampness into your face like it's trying to pick a fight. You wonder how much longer the thaw will last. 1 day, 2, a week. Then comes the strange tension, the feeling of being held in a pause. You can't relax because the cold will come back. It always does. And when it does, everything that's melting now will freeze solid again, often worse than before. Doors will stick shut. Ice will trap carts, sleds, livestock. Tools left outside will snap like dry twigs. Feet left damp will go black. And here's your fringe theory of the day. Some believe the Vikings kept emergency flood supplies hidden in elevated storage during winter thaws. Ropes, wedges, planks, even boats lashed beneath the eaves, just in case. No written record confirms it, but oral tradition and common sense suggest they weren't caught unprepared often. If your house was near water, you learned to respect it year-round. That night, the longhouse is tense. The fire burns hotter. People shift their bedding further from the walls. Straw is replaced. Gear is checked and double-checked. No one says it aloud, but they all know the thaw might be short-lived. And when the temperature drops again, it could take the whole house with it. You lie in your fresh straw watching the roof as another droplet falls near your bed and splashes into the clay. You move your furs just an inch to the left and make a mental note to keep your boots inside tonight. Because you've learned something crucial. The real threat isn't just the cold, it's the thaw, the melt, the in-between. Where things shift, crack and fall apart before the freeze returns to seal them in place. You wake up to darkness. Not the pitch black of deep night, but the dim, eerie murk of a cloudy morning too lazy to rise. The fire is still burning, low and steady, and the roof seems intact. No more dripping, no more mysterious midnight ceiling leaks. For now, you shift under your furs and realize something's changed. The air smells different, oily, sharp. Your eyes follow the glow of a smaller hemisphere, flickering light that's definitely not the hearth. Someone's lit one of the whale oil lamps. It's a strange thing, this tiny, sputtering pool of light hanging from a hook, barely the size of your hand, but pulsing like it thinks it's the sun. The flame wavers, caught in an invisible draft, and you watch the oil ripple slightly in its stone bowl. It doesn't smoke much, but it smells like scorched fish wrapped in seaweed and desperation. You wrinkle your nose. A nearby woman catches your expression and just smirks. Better than freezing, she says, then turns back to her work. She's trimming the wick with the kind of attention usually reserved for surgery. It's a delicate process. Too long and the flame gutters, too short and it smothers itself. The wick is twisted moss or sometimes linen if they can spare it, soaked in the thick, yellowish oil rendered from whale blubber or seals. And if you're wondering how pleasant it is to render whale fat in a smoky clear house packed with juried humans and goats, imagine boiling rubber shoes in a sauna and you're halfway there. But the results, worth it. Whale oil burns longer than wood, cleaner than dung, and it doesn't need constant tending. One lamp can burn for hours with just a small amount of oil, and in the endless nights of winter, that makes it pure treasure. You settle next to it, mesmerized by the way the flame dances in the slight current of air. It's warm, it's steady, and it doesn't cough smoke into your eyes like the hearth. Someone sets another lamp beside the door, then another near the cooking space. Slowly the longhouse begins to glow, not with the fiery chaos of the central fire, but with these smaller halos of calm, concentrated light. The place looks different under this lighting, quieter, more intimate. Shadows stretch long and blue-grey across the walls, and the usual murk softens into something almost cozy. For a moment it feels like you're inside a lantern yourself. You're handed a lamp to carry. It's warm to the touch and slightly greasy. You hold it with both hands, walking slowly across the room to avoid dripping. The oil is precious. Every drop was earned with danger, effort, and a smell that took days to scrub out of people's hair. You place it near a spinning station where someone is carding wool. They smile and nod. Work doesn't stop in winter. It just gets relocated closer to the fire and the lamps. Here's your historical nugget. Vikings in coastal communities, especially in places like Greenland and Iceland, relied heavily on marine oils for lighting. Driftwood was scarce, candles were a luxury, and pine resin torches didn't last. But sea mammals, whales, seals were plentiful, if you were brave or desperate enough to hunt them. Their blubber could be rendered down and stored, providing light through the long, dark months. In places with no natural forests, a single lamp might be the difference between surviving the night or not. Of course, there's dipped. Some scholars argue that lamps like these were mostly ceremonial, or for wealthier households. Others point to archaeological finds, stone and soapstone lamps, soot blackened from use, that suggest they were everyday tools. Either way, you're staring at one right now, and it's doing its job brilliantly. But whale oil comes at a cost. The smell never quite leaves. The process of rendering it, cutting the blubber into strips, boiling it over a fire for hours, straining out the solids, turns the longhouse into a chamber of horrors. Even days later, your clothes still carry the ghost of it. Your hair? Forget it. You now understand why most people here keep it braided or re-wrapped. You spend half the morning scrubbing your hands with a dried orange peel someone saved from trade. Anything to cut the smell. And now for your fringe fact of the day. There are rumours, hard to verify, but deliciously strange, that some Norse lamps were shaped like animals or mythic figures. A carved bear with a bowl in its back. A stone serpent with the wick in its mouth. Not just art, but symbolism. Light wasn't just functional, it was sacred. In a world ruled by seasons, the return of the sun was more than welcome. It was holy. These lamps, flickering defiantly into the dark, may have been offerings as much as tools. Later, as clouds thicken, and an early snow begins to fall again, someone brings out the largest lamp in the house. It's reserved for storytelling nights, and tonight, apparently, qualifies. They hang it high from a central beam, its wide bowl casting a glow that stretches across the room. The fire's still burning low, but it's the lamp that holds the room now. It's gentle, steady, less threatening than flame. You feel your breathing slow just watching it. People gather close, drawing their furs tighter. The storyteller clears his throat. An old man with half his teeth and a voice like gravel soaked in honey. He speaks slowly, rhythmically, and you lean in. The story is about light, about a god who caught a flame in his hand and carried it through the frost until spring, about a fox who lit the sky with sparks from his tail, about lamps that burned even when the oil ran dry. The kids listen with wide eyes. The adults pretend they're just resting. But their eyes don't stray from the flame. No one dares interrupt. It's not just a story, it's a reminder that light can live in small places, that even in this endless cold someone, somewhere is keeping the fire alive. You sit there long after the tale ends, eyes fixed on the lamp's flickering halo. Eventually someone snuffs it with a carved horn cap. Darkness returns like a curtain falling, but not completely. You still feel the echo of the flame behind your eyes. Back under your furs, you curl around a hot stone and breathe in the faint, fishy smoke of rendered oil still lingering in the air. You're not sure if it's comforting or gross anymore. Maybe both. But it worked. You had light in the darkness, and somehow that's enough. The cold today is different. Not louder, not harsher, just cleverer. It sneaks in, whispers through the cracks you forgot to seal, crawls down the back of your neck even though you're bundled like a rolled-up bearskin rug. It's not the kind of cold that hits like a wall, it's the kind that creeps. You don't notice it at first. Your fingers just feel a little slow, your lips a bit stiff. You start forgetting why you stood up, or where you put your mittens. You chalk it up to the usual winter fuzz, but deep down something's off. You've officially entered the season of cold confusion. At first, the others in the longhouse don't say much. It's normal for the darkest weeks to mess with your head. Everyone moves slower. Conversations get weird. Someone misplaces a spoon and swears the goats took it. You think you saw the fire breathe. You didn't. But for a moment, it really felt like it did. And when you trip over the same stool 3 times in a single day, your suspicion starts turning into quiet dread. Hypothermia doesn't always look like collapsing in the snow. Sometimes it looks like forgetfulness. Like giggling at nothing. Like watching someone take off their cloak while shivering and insisting they're too warm. The longhouse knows the signs. The oldest woman here is particularly watchful, every so often placing her hand against someone's cheek or pulling back their hood to look them in the eye. She's checking, constantly, and now she's checking you. You're pulled aside, sat down near the hearth, wrapped in 2 additional furs without being asked. She hands you a steaming bowl of something spicy and sour. Hot broth, thick with herbs that sting your throat in a good way. You want to argue, say you're fine, but your legs feel like tree trunks. Your fingers can't grip the spoon, and your voice sounds wrong even to your own ears. So you shut up and eat, and as the heat seeps in, you feel yourself returning. Blood moving, vision clearing, thought sharpening. The chill that had quietly wrapped itself around your brain like a fog begins to pull away, and you suddenly understand just how close you were to slipping under. You weren't just cold, you were getting gone. The Vikings had no clinical term for hypothermia, but they knew what it looked like. They knew it when someone went quiet for too long, or laughed at nothing, or started moving like they'd aged 50 years in an afternoon. They didn't talk about it much. but they watched for it, and when it came, they acted fast. Here's your historical nugget for the day. Norse people recognised the signs of what we now call cold-induced confusion. Saga literature, sparse as it is on medical detail, occasionally mentions warriors or travellers succumbing to the cold in strange ways, wandering off, stripping off clothing, lying down to rest in snowbanks, and never rising again. The exact causes weren't understood, but the behaviour was, and over generations, folk knowledge turned into instinct. When the cold makes you feel warm, you're in trouble. After your little episode, you're given a job that keeps you near the fire. Polishing tools, sorting dried herbs, helping to twist cords for hanging meats. The unspoken message is clear, you're on watch now. And while your pride takes a minor hit, your body is grateful. The heat is soaking in deeper. Your fingers are moving properly again. You even laugh on purpose at a joke someone tells about a goat and a missing glove. You're coming back. That's when someone else starts acting strange. A young man, maybe 17, starts pacing near the door. Says he's going out to fetch firewood, but there's no reason. Wood was stacked just hours ago. When someone tells him to wait, he laughs. Says he's just restless. Tries to leave without his cloak. Alarm bells. The old woman's on him in seconds. Wraps him in 2 cloaks, pulls him back and puts his hands to her face. He resists for a moment, then slumps like a thawing rabbit. The fire gets stoked again. He's sat down, fed, watched. You realise you're not the only one who almost went under today, and that brings us to the strange fringe fact. Some scholars believe the Vikings used scent to test for cold confusion. Certain pungent herbs like angelica, garlic or sharp resins might have been waved under a person's nose to see if they responded appropriately. No reaction meant danger. Whether it's true or not, the idea fits. Everything here is tactile, practical, sensory. You don't have a thermometer, but you have eyes, noses, hands. You use them. Later, someone tells you about a man they lost during a thaw freeze years ago. He'd gone out to check a snare and never came back. Found him 2 days later, curled under a tree, smiling. No signs of a struggle, just peace. The cold had taken him gently like a lullaby. And that's what makes it so scary. You don't feel like you're dying. You feel like you're dreaming. As night comes, the longhouse quiets. Everyone settles closer to the fire than usual. No one complains. You're all instinctively herding inward, making the warmth a shared shield. The lamps flicker. The walls creak softly. And you pull your furs tighter, not just for warmth but as armour. You check your fingers. They move. You test your breath, slow and steady. You glance at the others, counting them. Everyone's here. Tonight you stay awake a little longer. Not because you're scared, but because you understand now the cold doesn't always kill with fangs. Sometimes it sings you a lullaby, and you've decided not to fall asleep. It starts with a howl, low, stretched, and so distant at first that you think it's just wind winding through the forest, singing its usual eerie lullaby. But then comes another, closer, louder, more alive. You freeze, ladle in hand, standing halfway between the hearth and the food bowls, your breath caught halfway to exhale. Around you heads turn, no one speaks. Even the goats pause their usual chewing. That's not wind, that's wolves. You'd heard stories, of course. Everyone has. The woods beyond the longhouse, dark and tangled as they are, aren't empty. In the deepest cold, when hunger gnaws as sharp as any blade, wolves roam closer to human settlements. Not in snarling packs like fairy tales suggest, more like ghosts. 1 or 2 at a time, silent shadows darting along fence lines, sniffing for weakness. Someone moves toward the door slowly, as if the sound might hear him. He lifts the heavy fur curtain and peers outside. The longhouse is built with no windows, no clear view of what waits beyond its thick wooden walls, so when a noise comes from the darkness, scratching, snapping twigs, you can only imagine what shape it takes. The man returns and speaks low. "Just one," he says, "I think." But no one believes it. Where there's one wolf, there are always more. You watch as the older men quietly gather weapons. Not swords, not today. This isn't a battlefield. This is defence. Spears, clubs, a few axes. One person arms himself with what looks like a sharpened rake. Tools become weapons in moments like these. The youngest boys are sent to check the animals gently, making sure nothing's spooked or missing. The livestock are huddled together, eyes glassy, breath steaming in tight little clouds. Even the pigs are silent. You help bar the door, a thick plank slid into the place across the entryway, and begin checking the outer walls for weak points. Not that wolves can knock down a longhouse, but if they're starving enough, they'll try anything. You've heard tales of wolves digging through straw walls or slipping through unlatched doors to drag out a lamb, a chicken, even a child. And while some of those stories are definitely stretched by time and ale, they're not all lies. The fire is stoked higher, not just for warmth now, but to keep the scent of humans strong. Wolves, for all their cunning, hate fire. The brighter it burns, the less likely they'll creep too close. Someone tosses dried fish bones onto the flames, crackling pungent things, to strengthen the scent barrier. Another hangs a string of iron charms near the doorway, muttering something about warding off spirits. Whether that applies to wolves or not is unclear, but no one argues. And here's your historical anchor. Wolves were a constant presence in Viking Age Scandinavia. They were feared and respected, often appearing in sagas and myths as both symbols of chaos and sacred beasts. Odin's companions, Jerry and Freki, were wolves. Fenrir, the monstrous wolf of prophecy, was fated to devour the gods. But mythology aside, real wolves posed very real threats, especially in long winters when natural prey grew scarce. You settle back near the hearth, though no one truly relaxes. Every few minutes someone pauses to listen. Outside, another howl rolls through the air. It's closer this time and followed by a chorus. Not many, 3, maybe 4, but enough. And close enough to set every nerve in your spine on high alert. A boy sitting nearby whispers a story about his uncle, who lost a toe trying to chase off a wolf in the dark. He says the wolf wasn't even scared, just looked at him, snarled once, and left when it was ready. Another woman counters with her own tale, of a winter 3 years ago when a whole pack circled the village for nights, never attacking but always there waiting like frost on the edge of spring. That's the thing about wolves. It's not just the bite, it's the waiting, the watching, the fact that you know they're out there, eyes glowing at the edge of the trees, calculating risk, measuring you the way you measure them. And now for your fringe fact of the night. In some isolated regions, there's evidence that people used wolf stones, broad, flat rocks placed near livestock pens, soaked with human urine or smeared with ash and animal fat, to deter wolves. Whether this worked is anyone's guess, but the stones have been found near long-abandoned farms, and the theory is fascinating. A crude form of chemical messaging: we see you, and we're ready. Around midnight, the howling stops, not fades, stops, which somehow feels worse. Now there's just silence. No wind, no animals, no crackling of fire. Everyone in the longhouse goes still, ears straining as if the night itself has paused to listen. You don't realise you've been holding your breath until a log pops in the hearth and you jump, heart hammering like a drum. Eventually a decision is made. 2 men, armed and cloaked, step outside to patrol the perimeter. Just a quick sweep, they say. They leave the door open for only a moment, but cold air rushes in like a curse. You watch their shadows flicker against the wall, growing smaller as they move beyond the fire's glow. Minutes crawl. You sip from a mug of lukewarm broth, ears tuned to every shuffle, every creak. Then, a knock. 2 soft taps, the agreed signal. The men return. No wolf sightings, just tracks, big ones, circling. One even came right up to the edge of the longhouse and sat, like it was waiting for an invitation. You all sleep with weapons nearby that night. Not out of panic, out of respect, because the cold may be merciless, but it's predictable. Wolves make choices. They are not mindless, they're not weather. They're watching. And as you lie there, wrapped tight, heart finally slowing, you can't help but feel a strange kinship with them. You're both hungry, you're both cold, and you're both just trying to make it through another night. You're sitting near the fire, picking at a loose thread on your tunic, when you finally notice it. Not the colour. You already know it's a washed-out grey-brown that blends perfectly into the dirt floor, but the weave. Close, tight, almost stubborn. You run your fingers along the fabric and realise it's more than a tunic. It's armour. Not against blades or axes, but against the true enemy of this season. Cold. And suddenly, you see everything differently. Around the longhouse, people aren't just wrapped in warmth, they're wrapped in strategy. Every fold of wool, every fur cloak, every sock and mitten is part of an ancient survival language written in thread. Some wear short cloaks draped over one shoulder, and pinned with intricate brooches that seem more symbolic than functional. Others have wide belts with knives, pouches, or little carved charms swinging from them like a walking toolkit. You spot a child with a hand-woven scarf tucked so deep into her tunic that it's become part of her spine, and now you want to know how it's all made. You don't have to wonder for long. There's a soft clack-clack sound from the far end of the longhouse, the kind that doesn't match the usual rhythm of firewood splitting, or stew stirring. You follow the noise to a vertical frame pressed against the wall, draped with strands of wool stretched tight like a harp. A loom. The loom. The real heart of the house, and today, it's alive. A woman stands in front of it, pulling wool thread through the warp, moving a wooden shuttle back and forth with the kind of grace that only comes from doing something 1,000 times. Her hands are red and chapped, her back hunched slightly, but her movements are precise. Each pass of the shuttle lays another row of warmth. You watch, fascinated. She doesn't look up. She's in the zone. The warp threads hang vertically, held taut by clay weights at the bottom. You recognise some of them, flat little discs with carved symbols, multi-purpose tools turned artefacts. This isn't just crafting, it's survival. Every inch of woven cloth on your back, every mitten and tunic and woolen cap started here, on a loom just like this one. You suddenly feel underdressed. Here's your historical anchor. Viking textiles were primarily made of wool, sheared from hardy sheep bred to withstand brutal climates. After shearing, the wool was cleaned, carded, spun, and finally woven. It was a labour-intensive process that could take weeks or months per garment. Cloth was so valuable that it doubled as currency in some parts of the Norse world. Vadmal, standard woolen fabric, was used in trade just like silver or furs. But what strikes you now is the colour. It's not uniform. Subtle patterns emerge in the cloth, lines of brown, hints of green, even faded reds. Not decorative exactly, but expressive. You ask someone about it and they explain natural dyes, made from roots, bark, lichens, and even fermented urine. You flinch at that last part, and they grin. It sets the colour, please, they say. You nod subtold and try not to think too hard about your socks. Later you're invited to help prepare more wool. You're handed a pair of wooden paddles covered in small bent nails, carders. Your job is to brush raw wool between them, untangling and aligning the fibres into fluffy spinnable clouds. It's not glamorous. The wool sticks to everything, your sleeves, your eyelashes. A goat walks by and tries to eat some off your leg. You swat him away. He looks offended. Once carded, the wool is handed to another woman who spins it using a drop spindle. You've seen this tool before, a stick with a weighted disc at the bottom, but in her hands it's a weapon of creation. She draws out the wool in a thin line, lets the spindle twirl, and like magic, thread appears. Smooth, strong even. You try it and immediately make a rat's nest. She laughs and shows you again, slower. You feel like a child learning to walk, or a cat playing with yarn. And here's your fringe fact of the day. There's some evidence that Viking women would spin wool even while walking, using their drop spindles on the go to maximise productivity. You imagine someone hiking across a frozen field, dodging wolves, spinning thread like it's just another Tuesday. That's dedication. Back at the loom, you help with simpler tasks, measuring thread, tying bundles, even beating the woven sections down with a heavy wooden comb. Every tool here is handmade, every process learned by repetition. No manuals, no machines, just muscle memory and wool grease. By evening, you're holding your first finished project, a small square of coarse cloth, lopsided but functional. The woman who showed you how to weave runs her fingers across it, nods once, then folds it and hands it back. It's not a compliment, it's recognition. You've entered the long, itchy brotherhood of textile makers, and that's when it clicks. This wasn't just women's work or idle crafting. This was rhetorical infrastructure. The textile economy powered winter. Every warrior's cloak, every child's mitten, every funeral shroud, they all came from looms like this one, from calloused hands twisting warmth out of raw, oily wool. The Viking Age wasn't just about axes and ships, it was also about warp threads and wool dye, and the slow, relentless art of making your own armour. That night, as the fire burns low and the longhouse hums with soft chatter and spinning wheels, you wrap yourself tighter in your tunic. You feel the threads differently now. Not just as fabric, but as protection, as labour, as time. You didn't make this tunic, but someone did. Someone like the woman with the loom, who pulled warmth from the hands of sheep and turned it into survival. And tomorrow, if you're lucky, you'll learn how to make socks. The ground groans when you walk on it now. It's a low, wet sound, like an old man muttering beneath his breath. Each step presses water up through the mud, dark and cold and reluctant to move. The snowmelt is mostly gone, soaked into the earth or frozen again into strange, jagged shapes along the edges of the trees. Everything smells like rot. Old roots, damp wood, last year's moss slowly giving up its grip. You've been invited to the root cellar today, or, more accurately, assigned to it. It's not glamorous. Nothing about digging through preserved vegetables in sub-zero weather screams heroism. But once you get outside, you realise this isn't just storage, it's life insurance. The entrance is humble, a low, slanted door made from rough planks, partially buried under a mound of snow and straw. You help clear the top, scraping away ice with a dull-bladed knife. Someone lifts the heavy door with a grunt and a cough, revealing a set of wooden steps leading down into darkness. The air that rolls out is sharp and earthy, as if the ground itself just exhaled after holding its breath all winter. You're handed a torch and told not to drop it. "We've already lost one batch to mice," someone mutters. You decide not to ask. The cellar is deeper than it looks. You duck your head and descend slowly, boots slipping slightly on the damp steps. The walls are made of stone and packed earth, reinforced with split logs. You can tell it's been dug and redug over generations, expanded, patched, reinforced. There's a kind of reverence to it, like a shrine built underground, and in a way that's what it is. Root cellars weren't optional in Viking life. They were the lungs of the household. During the growing season, food came in fast and fragile. During winter, it had to endure. Here, in the frost-bitten dark, turnips become currency. Onions are more valuable than poetry. A barrel of cabbage is the difference between a meal and another bowl of hot water flavoured with regret. You crouch beside a wooden crate filled with parsnips, their skin pale and waxy but firm. There's a system here. Older vegetables are pulled first, marked with bits of coloured string or carved wooden tags. Fresh ones are layered in straw or ash. Everything's stored in sections, root crops in one corner, dried beans in another. Smoked meat wrapped in cloth and strung from the ceiling like forgotten puppets. You touch a carrot. It's cold but intact. It hasn't gone soft, hasn't turned black or mouldy. You hold it up to the light like a rare treasure, because that's exactly what it is. Here's your historical anchor. Viking root cellars were dug into hillsides or under buildings, exploiting the naturally stable temperatures of the earth. Even in brutal winters, the temperature a few feet underground could hover just above freezing. Perfect for preserving food without letting it freeze solid. No magic, just physics, and a deep understanding of the land. You move further in, guided by a woman who knows this space like her own bed. She checks each section with practiced care, poking through bags of dried peas, sniffing bundles of herbs, tapping on barrels to test their contents. Occasionally she scowls. "This one's turning," she says, handing you a bundle of wilted greens. You carry them up to the compost pit, where they'll be frozen solid until spring. Viking garbage doesn't go anywhere fast. Back inside the cellar, you spot something odd. A sealed crock wrapped in leather, tucked into a nook near the back wall. You ask about it, and the woman raises an eyebrow. "Skyer," she says, "fermented dairy." She opens it briefly. You wish she hadn't. The smell punches you directly in the dignity. It's sour, sharp, with the emotional profile of an insult. But it's still edible, probably. And now for your fringe fact of the day. Some Viking households use pits lined with seaweed to store particularly fragile crops, cabbage, leeks, and even eggs coated in ash or clay. The seaweed acted as both insulation and pest control, repelling insects and maintaining moisture. It's a weird, slimy solution, but remarkably effective, if you can get past the smell. After the inventory's done, you haul a basket of onions and dried legumes back to the longhouse. Your hands are freezing, and your arms ache from carrying a bundle that weighs more than some of the children running around with stolen mittens. But there's something satisfying about it. Tangible. You've contributed. Inside, the cook greets your basket like a returning champion. She's been stretching flavourless broth with dried herbs and regret for days. And now, with a full haul of onions and beans, she's practically giddy. "Soup will taste like soup again," she grins. You're not sure whether to laugh or cry. You settle near the hearth, hands still aching from the cold, and watch as the onions are chopped and added to a pot already bubbling with barley and dried meat. The smell rises slowly, familiar, rich, undeniably real. It's the smell of a meal with backbone. Someone pats your shoulder. You've earned first bowl, they say. You sip it slowly, savouring every layer of flavour. The onions are sweet, the broth hearty, the meat chewy but passable. It's not a feast, but it's satisfying in a way that your body understands before your mind does. Because in this world, winter isn't about grand survival moments. It's not always about wolves or storms or sudden firewood shortages. Sometimes it's about knowing your food is safe 2 meters underground, tucked into straw and ash, waiting patiently for its moment to shine in a soup. Later that night, as the wind picks up again and the walls groan with frost, you lie in your straw bed and imagine the root cellar beneath you, dark, cold, full of promise. You fall asleep knowing that for now you have something to eat tomorrow. And in Viking winter, that's a victory. You wake to the sound of iron scraping against wood. Not a violent sound, more like someone carefully sharpening patience. You sit up slowly, blinking the sleep from your eyes, and spot the source, a man hunched over a low bench, dragging a whetstone along the blade of a long curved knife. His breath clouds in the cold air, his focus absolute. The fire's still low, casting soft orange ribbons across the room, and all around you others are beginning to stir. Today is butchering day. You're not thrilled about it. No one ever is. It's not the blood, though there will be plenty. It's the knowing, the acknowledging that the animal you've fed and watered, perhaps even named, is now on the menu. But this isn't sentimentality. It's logistics. You don't butcher for fun, you butcher because you've looked at the stores, counted the dried meat, eyed the shrinking pile of root vegetables, and decided it's time. Outside, a low wooden platform has been cleared of snow. Someone laid down fresh straw to soak the worst of what's coming. You're handed a bucket of warm water, heated over the hearth, and follow the others out into the pale morning light. It's the kind of cold that feels like a dare. The goat stands patiently, almost nobly, tethered to a post. It doesn't know yet. Or maybe it does and just accepts it, in the resigned way animals sometimes do. No one talks. It happens quickly, respectfully, with practiced movements and a sharp, clean cut. The goat doesn't scream. You do, in your head. The blood spills into a bowl and is stirred immediately with a wooden spoon. You're told it keeps it from clotting too quickly. The meat will come later. For now, the blood is the priority. It'll be cooked into sausage, mixed with oats and onions and spices, until it tastes less like iron and more like survival. Inside the longhouse, preparations begin. A table is cleared, the fire roars back to life, herbs are crushed. A woman begins to braid cleaned intestines into long looping ropes to be filled later. You don't ask how they were cleaned, you don't want to know. You're handed a small knife and a pile of fat and told to start trimming. You nod. This at least feels doable. Here's your historical anchor for the day. Vikings practiced full animal butchery, nothing wasted. Meat, obviously, but also blood, bones, hooves, intestines, brains. Everything had a use. Blood was turned into puddings and sausages. Bones became tools or fuel. Even stomach linings could be cleaned and used to store fat or render gelatin. They weren't just practical, they were precise. The smell is heavy. Not bad exactly, but thick. A mix of raw meat, wood smoke, warm blood, and herbs. It clings to your clothes, sneaks into your hair, settles on your skin. You don't mind it as much as you thought you would. It smells like doing something. Like taking control of the season rather than letting it take control of you. As the butchering continues, you help process the goat's head, an especially complicated task, and not for the squeamish. The cheeks are saved for stew, the tongue too, even the eyes are removed and added to a small clay pot. For luck, someone says. You're not sure if they're serious. You're not sure you want to know. Later, slabs of meat are salted and packed tightly in wooden barrels, stacked near the fire to cure slowly over the coming days. Fat is rendered into tallow, which will become everything from cooking oil to lamp fuel to a poor man's skin balm. You watch someone smear a dab of warm tallow on a cracked knuckle and wince at how effective it looks. That's when you learn the phrase, everything but the bleat. It's said with half a smile, but it's true. The Vikings didn't have the luxury of waste. If you raised an animal through a brutal northern season, fed it precious grain or scraps, kept it warm through frost and rain, you didn't let any part of it go unused. It wasn't cruelty, it was necessity. And now for your fringe fact of the day. In some Norse households, blood from freshly slaughtered animals was used in ritual, not just culinary, but spiritual. It might be sprinkled on thresholds, smeared on idols, even painted in symbols on doors during midwinter feasts, whether to honour the gods, the ancestors, or just to remind the cold who's boss. No one agrees, but blood wasn't just meat. It were power. That night, the longhouse smells incredible, not the sharp iron tang of morning, but the rich, savoury comfort of something earned. A pot bubbles with stew, goat meat, onions, dried apples, and a handful of barley. The blood sausages sizzle on flat stones near the fire, crisping at the edges, almost singing as the fat cooks out. Everyone's quieter than usual, maybe tired, maybe reflective. You take a bowl, thank the cook, and sit cross-legged by the hearth. The stew is thick and dark, flavoured with juniper and thyme, and the meat is surprisingly tender. The sausage? Better than it has any right to be. You chew slowly, thinking about the animal from this morning. Not with guilt exactly, more with recognition. You took something from the world today, and in return it gave you this warmth, this food, this moment. A child nearby pulls a small bone from her soup and smiles. She's going to clean it, dry it, and make a whistle. To cool spring, she says. Everyone laughs, you laugh too. Later the bones are set aside, cleaned and sorted. Some will become needles, others buttons. Some will be carved into beads. One will be tossed into the fire, maybe for luck, maybe just to hear it crack. And as you curl into your bed that night, full and exhausted, you realise you've crossed another threshold. Butchering day changed something, not just in your stomach, but in your mind. You understand now what it means to use everything, to pull life from death and carry it forward. Because in this world survival is a cycle, and today you became part of it. The next morning the air in the longhouse tastes like iron and ash and warmth. It's the kind of morning where your muscles ache before you even open your eyes. Not from pain, but from effort. Good, honest effort. You roll over and stretch, your back cracking like a frozen branch, and you listen for the usual sounds. Fire crackling, low conversation, boots thudding across the packed earth. But today there's something new, a rhythm, not drums, not footsteps, it's tapping? You sit up and follow the sound. Near the back wall, hunched over a worn plank of wood, is a man carving something with a curved blade. The tapping is his knife meeting the wood again and again, shaving off paper-thin curls with each pass. His movements are slow, deliberate, like he's talking to the wood. You watch in silence for a while before he gestures for you to join him. You do, cautiously. He passes you a piece of bone, long, pale, cleaned and polished until it shines like ivory. Make something, he says. You stare at the bone like it just challenged you to a duel. You're not a carver. You're not even sure which end of the tool to hold, but you've survived worse. So you grip the carving blade and begin. It feels clumsy at first, too sharp in the wrong places, too dull in others, but you press on, slowly coaxing a shape from the white surface. Something simple, a bead maybe, or a button. He watches, says nothing, just nods once. You're learning a different kind of winter work now, the kind done with hands, not back. With patience instead of sweat. The longhouse may be warm, but the cold is still out there, wrapped around the world like a wolfskin blanket. And during this lull, this strange, quiet stretch of days where the worst might be behind you, you notice how people turn inward. Not just physically, but mentally. They begin to make. Someone nearby is braiding cord. Another is mending a boot. A child is drawing spirals into a piece of leather with a stick dipped in berry juice. Everywhere you look, people are fixing, building, repairing, creating, and not just out of boredom, but out of ritual. This is how you fill the space between surviving and thriving. You make something that wasn't there before. You learn the basics of carving bone. First, clean it well, boil, scrape, dry. Second, pick your shape carefully. Bone is unforgiving, push too hard, and it'll snap. Push too soft, and you'll waste hours. You try your hand at a needle. It's crooked, a little lumpy, but technically usable. The carver grins. You'll get it, or you won't, but it'll be yours. And here's your historical anchor. Viking craftspeople, men and women alike, used winter downtime to produce everything from tools to ornaments. Bone, antler, wood, leather, iron, each had its place. Skilled carvers were especially valued, not just for tools, but for jewellery, game pieces, and trade goods. These weren't hobbies, they were currency. Craft was survival wrapped in beauty. You glance at the man's own work, a spoon carved from ash wood, its handle shaped like a curling serpent. It's functional, but also poetic. The lines are clean. The eyes of the serpent hold tiny chips of polished amber. You wonder who he's making it for. He doesn't say. Elsewhere in the longhouse, someone is working with leather, soaking it in a wooden tub before stretching it over a frame. The smell of damp hide is sharp and earthy. A woman is reshaping an old pair of shoes, sewing patches over the holes with sinew thread. She tests the soles by stomping them against the ground, then hands them off to a boy with feet barely smaller than your own. He grins and puts them on immediately, clearly proud to be wearing something built for winter. Another person shows you their box of carved game pieces, tiny animals made from antler marked with runes and scratches. They're used in a game called Hypothermia, something between chess and a bar fight. You play a few rounds and get absolutely destroyed by a woman who can read your every move like she's reading a scroll. She laughs and carves a tiny X on your piece. Loser mark, she jokes. You accept it with dignity, and now your fringe fact for the day: some Viking Age game boards were portable, carved into the underside of shields, or into flat stones kept in travel kits. Games weren't just for fun, they were tools for teaching strategy, patience, and leadership. A good Hypothermia player was considered clever. A great one was considered dangerous. By midday, the longhouse smells like wood shavings, cooked grain, and a faint tang of drying hide. Someone starts humming as they carve, and the sound drifts across the room, slow and low and oddly comforting. You lose track of time. It's like the rhythm of making things erases the clock. It's no longer morning or afternoon, it's just the making time. Eventually you sit back, hands sore, eyes blurred from focusing on tiny details, but your bead is finished. A small disc of bone, hole carved through the centre, sides etched with a wobbly line that could maybe pass for a rune. It's ugly. It's perfect. It's yours. Someone offers to trade. A spindle whorl made from clay in exchange for your bead. You agree instantly, not for value, just for the act. That's how trade starts. Not with silver or scales, but with hands and time. That night the fire burns low and the longhouse fills with stories. People show off their crafts. Someone carved a tiny cat from driftwood. Another made a comb from antler. You give your clay spindle whorl a place of honour in your small belongings pouch, not because you'll use it, but because it means you belong. You fall asleep with bone shavings still under your nails and the knowledge that you've helped add to the house, not just in firewood or chores or goat wrangling, but in the slow, quiet way of makers, because in this cold even beauty has a purpose. By now you've stopped wondering what day it is. You don't count time in weeks anymore. You count it in firewood piles, stew refills, and the slow, uneven drip of thaw water down the edge of the wall. Outside the days are slightly longer, just enough to trick you into thinking the cold might be on its way out. But the longhouse isn't fooled. No one says spring yet. That word doesn't get used casually here. That word waits. Instead, the house shifts in rhythm. Slowly, subtly, like a creature preparing to wake. The animals are louder, restive. The hens squabble more. The goats knock over their feed bins just because they can. You hear more conversation about fishing nets, planting tools, repairing the wagon. These are spring tasks, almost spring tasks. But first, the cleansing. You wake up to the unmistakable sound of scrubbing. Someone is splashing water across the packed dirt floor, and a sharp herbal scent bites at your nose. Birch maybe, juniper, or juniper again. Whatever it is, it makes your eyes sting a little. You sit up and immediately get a wet rag tossed into your lap. Cleaning day, someone announces like it's the festival of the year. You look around. No one else seems particularly thrilled either. But you get to work. The longhouse has survived the worst of winter, but it hasn't come out unscathed. The straw on the floor is flattened, filthy, half frozen in spots. Ash from the hearth has drifted into every corner. Layers of grease, smoke, dust, and human everything cling to the walls. It smells like meat, sweat, oil, furs, and damp wool, all trying to settle their differences in a single room. Someone swings open the door and a gasp of clean, brutal air rushes in. A few people immediately regret that choice, but the airflow helps. You haul out the worst of the straw, shovel up ashes, shake out blankets and furs. Everything that can be beaten is beaten. Rugs slapped against logs, bedding snapped in the wind. It's not just cleaning, it's purification. And here's your historical anchor. Viking longhouses were periodically cleared out and refreshed, especially near the end of winter or before major festivals. Old straw was removed to prevent disease. Walls were sometimes scraped and washed. Herbal smoke, juniper, pine or dried herbs, was burned to cleanse the air and drive out pests. This wasn't just hygiene, it was symbolic, a way to push out the death stink of winter and invite life back in. The smell of herbs intensifies as someone tosses a bundle onto the fire. A thick, aromatic smoke curls through the room, and everyone starts coughing dramatically. It's awful and strangely comforting. You're told it keeps bugs away. Also bad spirits, also bad smells, also just because. Later, someone starts airing out the clothes. Layers of wool and linen are hung near the doorway, flapping like tired flags. You're helped patch a hole in your tunic, your first attempt at sewing, and it looks like someone tried to stitch a leaf using a rock, but it holds. And you wear it proudly, because patching means preserving. Fixing what you already have instead of starting over. In Viking winter, everything gets a second chance. Even the food stores get attention. You help inventory the remaining supplies in the root cellar, checking for rot, organising by usefulness. One of the older women tosses out a bag of dried apples with a dramatic sigh. Mould, a small but notable loss. Spring will make up for it, she mutters, though no one agrees out loud. Hope is a private thing here. And here's your fringe fact of the day. In some parts of Scandinavia, pre-spring cleaning included symbolic sweeping out of spirits or misfortune. Brooms made from birch or heather were used to brush out corners in ritualized patterns, sometimes followed by singing or chanting. It's unclear whether this was pagan or practical or both, but it left people feeling lighter, and that counts for something. In the evening, as the sun dips behind a low bank of clouds and everything turns blue and silver, the longhouse glows with effort. The floor is swept, the walls are cleaner, furs have been rotated, dry ones pulled from storage, the wet ones hung near the hearth. Everyone looks a bit fresher, less like survivors, more like people. You sit by the fire, still clutching your pitiful sewing project, and watch a young boy drag a sack of herbs into the house like it's treasure. He announces it proudly, for the bath, and you blink. Bath? Yes, a real one. A large wooden tub is hauled out and filled halfway with hot water from the kettle. Then a mix of pine needles, dried flowers, and something that smells faintly of mint is tossed in. The water turns murky green, and you stare at it like it's a potion. People take turns, one at a time. You wait nervously for yours. When it's finally your turn, you step in and careful not to let the others see just how delightfully ridiculous you feel. The water is scalding at first, but then it just becomes bliss. Steam rises. Your muscles sigh. You're fairly certain this is what luxury felt like in the 9th century. You scrub your arms, your legs, your hair, using a rough linen cloth and a paste made from ash and tallow. It works, sort of. You smell less like cold meat and more like warm smoke, but you feel human again. And that's worth everything. Later, with your skin still tingling, you sit near the fire in dry clothes and drink a mug of warm, sweetened milk. People are quieter tonight. Not tired, just peaceful. Clean house, clean bodies, full bellies, calm air. For the first time you think spring might actually come. And even if it doesn't tomorrow, you know this house, these people, this rhythm, they'll carry you through. Because cleaning isn't just about dirt. It's about believing there's something worth staying clean for. Morning arrives quieter than usual. Not silent, just hushed, like the longhouse is holding its breath. Even the goats seem more polite. You sit up, rubbing your eyes, expecting the familiar rush of chill air against your face. But it doesn't come. Not like before. The air is still cold, yes, but not biting, not predatory. It brushes against your skin instead of sinking its claws in. You pause, testing the sensation. Then you rise slowly and step toward the door. You're not the only one curious. A few others have gathered, watching as one of the men pulls aside the thick fur curtain and peeks outside. A moment later he laughs, not the sharp, bitter laugh of someone trying to defy winter, but the surprised chuckle of someone seeing something new. He gestures you over, you step outside, and just like that the world is different. It's not that the snow is gone, it isn't. It still lies in thick, matted blankets across the ground, piled up in quiet drifts and slick slopes. But something's changed in the light. The sky is no longer the flat, unforgiving grey you've grown used to. It's pale blue, streaked with long white clouds, and the sun, yes, the sun, is actually shining. Not a weak shimmer, a real sun. You blink against it, stunned. It's warm. Not fire warm, not stew warm, but the kind of warmth that feels ancient. Like the sun is reaching down and saying, hey, you made it. You glance around. Everyone else sees it too. No one says the word spring. No one wants to jinx it, but you all feel it. In the softening snow, in the rivulets of meltwater trickling down the eaves, in the smell, faint but real, of thawed earth. A woman crouches to scoop up a handful of slush and grins. Mud, she says reverently. You spend the morning outside for the first time in what feels like centuries. You help shovel snow off the roof, not because it's crushing the beams, but because it finally can be moved without freezing your fingers into popsicles. The ice no longer bites, it yields. That's the difference. And as you work, here comes your final historical anchor. Many Norse communities celebrated this moment, not with huge feasts or parades, but with quiet rituals, the lighting of small fires outside the home, the offering of herbs or bread to the earth. Even just the act of washing the floors and opening the doors wide was a symbolic release. Winter had been a prison, and this was the first crack in its walls. There is still danger ahead, everyone knows it. Late frosts are common, sudden storms, false springs. No one puts away their furs just yet. But the energy in the longhouse shifts. There's laughter again. Not the strained, sarcastic kind that says, at least we didn't freeze, but the light, forward-looking kind that says, what if we plant onions next week? People begin preparing, tentatively. The tools are pulled out of storage, the rust scratched off, handles reinforced, blades sharpened. A woman unrolls a bundle of seeds wrapped in waxed cloth and checks them like they're gold coins. Someone tests the wheel of a cart that's been propped against the barn for 3 months. It creaks but holds. That's good enough. And here comes your fringe fact of the day. In some oral traditions, it's said that a rooster crowing before dawn on the first clear spring day was a signal from the gods, that the land was waking, that those who'd survived winter could now claim their reward. You haven't heard any roosters, but the birds, those that fled for warmer air, have started to return. One small brave sparrow flutters past the door like a scout reporting home. Inside, the longhouse begins to breathe again. The heavy furs are pulled from the doorway during the day to let light in. The floor, now dry and swept, is scattered with the new straw. The fire burns lower, not because you're running out of wood, but because you don't need as much. That's a new feeling. You go out again in the afternoon, boots crunching softly on wet snow. You wander past the edge of the yard, past the fence line, toward the tree line where everything still sleeps beneath a crust of ice. And there, between the roots of a gnarled birch, you see it. The tiniest green shoot. Just a whisper of colour in the cold. But it's real. You kneel beside it, not touching, just watching. This little thing, this stubborn plant, is doing what you've been trying to do all winter. Grow. It doesn't ask for warmth. It doesn't wait for perfect. It just reaches. That's what survival means here. Not avoiding hardship, but inching toward light even while the ground is still cold. You return to the longhouse quieter, humbled. You tell no one about the sprout. Not yet. It's your secret hope, tucked away like a warm stone under your coat. That night, you eat the last of the dried apples. Someone puts a sprig of dried mint in the stew, and the entire table gasps like they've seen a ghost. It's such a tiny thing, that taste, but it reminds everyone of summer, a green, of sweetness. You eat slowly, savouring every bite, every mouthful of broth and barley and dreams. People begin to talk about what comes next, what needs mending, what needs planting, who'll scout the river trail to see if it's thawed enough to fish. No one's forgetting winter. You still sleep close to the fire, you still keep your boots near your bed. But the planning has shifted. No longer how to survive, now it's what to build. And you made it. You survived the coldest nights of the year without electricity, without gas, without anything except furs, fire, patience, and a little luck. You sweated, you fought till you froze, you itched, you cooked, you carved bone. You burned herbs and boiled roots and pulled warmth from scoons. And now you stand at the edge of something else, something gentler. Spring isn't here, not quite, but it's coming, and you're ready for it. So here you are, firelight flickering low behind your eyelids, your muscles softer than they've been in weeks, and your thoughts finally settling, not racing like a panicked animal through a snowstorm, but circling gently, like embers drifting upward into smoke. The longhouse is quiet now, not because it has to be, but because it can be. The cold doesn't gnash its teeth at the door anymore. The wind still howls at times, but it sounds less like a threat and more like a story being told far away, somewhere you don't need to go. You lie in your fur bedding, bundled with the familiar weight of wool and straw and satisfaction. Not comfort, necessarily, but earned rest. The kind you feel in your bones, in your lungs, in the deep, warm place behind your sternum. You think about everything you've seen, every frozen breath, every blistered hand, every night you fell asleep unsure if the roof would hold or the food would last, and now you breathe, full and slow, because somehow you did it. The goats snore quietly. The fire cracks every few minutes like it's shifting in its sleep, and all around you people are wrapped in their own victories, their own stories of frost and fire, work and warmth. You didn't survive alone, not even close. You survived because of a longhouse full of hands and hearts and traditions passed down like heirlooms, worn soft by time. You survived because people made furs and mended socks and knew how to stack firewood just so. You survived because humans, at their best, are stubborn, brilliant little furnaces of hope. And as you drift towards sleep, you remember that green shoot. Small, brave, ridiculous in its timing. But not wrong, spring is coming, the sun is returning, the ground still sleeping is listening. And you're ready to plant something, tomorrow, but for now, you can rest.